The protagonist is run over by a truck at 30 years old, thinking about how he never achieved anything in his life and only worked to survive. He considers his death almost comical. Right after, a woman calls him Zinc-sama, which leaves him confused since that's not his name. The protagonist wakes up in a luxurious room, confused as he realizes his new reality. The maid is at his side, and he's weirded out by what's going on. Soon, he realizes his name is now Saitu Jinkuru. He wakes up again, with the maid emotional, explaining that he fainted during an audience with the crown prince. She laments, saying he was expelled from the royal guard and banished from the kingdom. Confused, he doesn't understand what's going on, feels that everything is strange, and questions who he really is and what he's doing there. The protagonist finds out his new name is Zinc Nonrand. He's 14 years old, and heir to the title of Duke. Since he was a child, he was assigned as the Crown Prince's royal guard in the Kingdom of Rosetta, but ended up being rejected by the prince, who declared he didn't want to see him anymore. Even though his family is famous for producing great spearmen, Zinc was never good with spears, which made him insecure and hurt his posture and reputation. He realizes he now has two sets of memories, his past life as Jinkuru and his new identity as Zinc. He gets that he reincarnated into this young man who's now fallen out of favor with the king. As he thinks about it, he notices his current personality is starting to become more like Jinkuru's. The maid, surprised, comments that he seems nicer than usual, even though he looks weak. Confused, he remembers reading about isekai in light novels, but never imagined it would actually happen to him. He's surprised to hear that he's been banished. The maid confirms that, after being removed as royal guard, he was also disinherited and lost his noble title. On top of that, he's ordered to leave the kingdom within a month, while someone else is named heir in his place. The maid laments the tragedy, while he stays silent in the face of it all. From Zinc's memories, the protagonist realizes that being banished is basically a death sentence, since the lands outside the capital are full of monsters. Bitter, he thinks he got a second chance at life just to face death again. Still, he decides to start getting ready and asks Urza for help, which surprises her with his determination. He notices a screen in front of Urza showing her level and class, like a game status. Surprised, he asks what he's seeing, but quickly realizes only he can see this information. Confused, he figures this is like a video game interface and figures out he's got a unique skill. He notices he can see detailed info about Urza level, HP, mana, skills. When he focuses, he can get even more details, like a status screen. He figures out this skill is called Vision, something that's super rare in this world. He tries to check his own status, thinking it should be possible like in games. He can see some info, but the screen is blurry and hard to read. Determined, he keeps focusing, telling himself he needs to keep trying until he can see his stats clearly. Finally, he manages to see his own status screen clearly. He finds out he's at level 9, with various magic skills and attributes shown as letters, and has unique powers like a storage box. Noticing his spear skill is low, he understands why he was never good at it. Surprised, he calmly starts analyzing his abilities, while Urza watches worried and calls out to him. He checks his skills and sees his affinity with swords is low, and spears are even worse, both at weak levels. On the other hand, his enchantment magic is ranked S, the highest, and his fire, water, and wind magics are B, earth is A, and alchemy and healing are S. He figures out his passive skill, Appraise, is what lets him see these status screens. Surprised, he starts to realize just how much potential he really has. He's shocked to discover his enchantment. Magic is super rare, with only 3 other users in the world. He realizes he's now the 4th person with this power, and gets excited about the chance to use it to grow. Determined, he says he'll take advantage of this unique ability to survive and thrive in this new world. Meanwhile, Urza is startled by his sudden reaction. Esther shows up in Zinc's room, calling him Oni-sama, and apologizing for not being able to help with his situation. Still, Esther is supportive, bringing a spear and money so he can prepare. Zinc realizes Esther is one of the few people he can really trust in the house. Zinc thanks Esther, but explains the spear won't be useful to him. Instead, he asks Esther to buy some of his old stuff and use the money to get supplies, since it'll be tough to get merchants to help him without his title. Esther agrees and offers to help, while Zinc plans to write out a list of what he needs. All the items on Zinc's list are delivered, filling his room with supplies and weapons. Esther asks how he plans to carry so much stuff, since it'd be impossible to haul it all alone. Confident, Zinc asks all the servants to leave, hinting he has a secret method to solve the problem. Zinc asks Esther to keep what he's about, to show a total secret, saying no one can know, not even their father. He stresses it has to stay hidden until he leaves the kingdom. Esther, surprised and curious, watches as Zinc gets ready to reveal his method. Zinc reveals his secret skill to Esther, the box of holding, a rare power that lets him store items in a special space. He explains he only found out about this ability recently, but he plans to put most of his supplies in there. Esther, surprised, realizes how valuable this skill is, while Zinc shows confidence that he can use it to get ready for what's ahead. Zinc shows off his storage skill and impresses Esther, who praises him in surprise. When he uses his appraisal skill, Zinc finds out Esther also has the box of holding, though Esther doesn't know it yet. He thinks about telling him, but decides to keep his appraisal skill a secret for now, thinking about how best to handle it. Zinc asks Esther for a small vial of his blood, hinting he'll use it to form a contract. Esther agrees without hesitation, saying his brother's will is his command. Zinc thanks him and asks Esther to go with him to the Adventurers Guild, since alone he'd have a hard time being accepted. Esther happily agrees, promising to help in any way, while Zinc thinks about how Esther is a good kid. Zinc walks through town with Esther, but quickly draws stares and whispers from the townsfolk. People comment that he's the banished duke's son, showing contempt and curiosity. Surprised by how hostile people are, Zinc tries to keep his composure, while Esther advises him to ignore the gossip and not listen to the criticism. Zinc thinks about the bad reputation he inherited, being seen by commoners as an incompetent and arrogant noble who abused his title. He understands Urza's loyalty, since she's been with him as a wet nurse since he was born, but he doesn't get why Esther admires him so much. Even checking his memories doesn't help. Despite that, he keeps going and arrives at the Adventurers Guild. At the guild, Zinc starts his registration. The receptionist explains that by putting a drop of blood on the card, he'll be officially registered as a rank G adventurer. She starts explaining the guild rules quickly and in a bored way, like she just wants to get rid of them. Zinc and Esther notice, but stay quiet to finish the process. After finishing the guild registration, Zinc decides to train before dinner. He thinks that, according to his status, he's way more talented with a sword than a spear. While practicing, he thinks that if he'd known about his real skills sooner, maybe his life would have gone in a totally different direction. Zinc trains hard with the sword and notices how young and agile his body is, feeling recharged by this new chance at life. Satisfied with his progress, he thinks the only thing left is to give Esther the present he prepared. Zinc checks his skills and decides he can use alchemy and enchantment now that he has Esther's blood, planning to make something special as a gift. During dinner at the Norin mansion, he's already thinking about studying more after the meal. At that moment, the head of the family, Gordon Norand, confronts him, making it clear he knows Zinc's situation. During dinner, Zinc's father, Gordon Norand, says this will be Zinc's last meal at the house, since he'll have to leave for good the next day. Zinc accepts it calmly. Gordon mentions hearing that Zinc trained with a sword earlier, which surprises him, but he decides to drop the subject. Zinc then stands up politely, saying he needs to get ready to leave. Zinc gets ready to test his enchantment magic on his gear. He notes that the enchanter's level limits the effects, but since his enchantment magic is at level 3, he can power up his items a lot. After enchanting them, every piece of his adventurer set gets a bonus to athletics, adding +27 to his natural stat of 25. Impressed, he realizes how strong he can get with this rare skill. After enchanting his gear, Zinc boosts his athletics stat to 52, getting curious about how much stronger he's become. Excited, he can't wait to test his strength the next day. Meanwhile, he thinks about making a special present for Esther, but realizes enchanting drains a lot of his energy, so he has to use a mana potion to recover. At the west gate of the capital, Zinc gets ready to leave the kingdom. Esther and Urza go with him as far as they can, wishing him safety. Before leaving, Zinc thinks about the spear he got from his father, made of mithril, and considers melting it into ingots to sell or reusing the shaft. Determined, he finishes his preparations and sets off on his journey. Before leaving, Zinc gives Esther a present to thank him for all his help. He gives him a box and a card, asking Esther to put a drop of blood on the card when he's alone, but to only open the box after Zinc is already out of the kingdom. Surprised and curious, Esther takes the gift, while Zinc assures him he'll like what's inside. Zinc leaves through the castle gate, waving goodbye confidently. Behind him, Esther cries and tells his brother to stay safe, promising to pray for him. Urza quietly watches the scene, moved by his departure. Zinc leaves the city and heads into the unknown, looking at the landscape ahead with determination. He tells himself this is the starting point of his new life, ready to face the challenges ahead and rewrite his fate. Zinc plans his route to the border, aiming to pass through the city of Rio in 2 days, and then cross the territories of the Peltier and Movitz dukes, which will take another 4 days of travel. Even though he's alone and a bit worried, he gets ready to camp along the way. Determined, he decides to first test out just how much his new athletics stats can help him on his journey. Zinc puts his new stats to the test and is surprised at how fast he can run. Going way faster than he expected, he realizes he might even reach the city of Rio by the end of the day, excited about his new strength. Zinc gets to a road and finds a massacre, with bodies scattered and a wrecked carriage. Surprised, he realizes the power of the enchantments he used. Zinc panics when he sees the bodies, trying to control his breathing and stay calm, but he gets overwhelmed and wishes he could enchant his own mind. Zinc is caught off guard by a group of goblins charging at him. He dodges quickly and figures out they're the ones behind the massacre. Zinc reacts fast and takes down the goblins with his sword. Using his appraisal skill, he finds out their combat and athletics levels are low, realizing he only got out unscathed because he was alert from the start. Zinc instinctively dodges an attack, noticing his body moved on its own to defend him. Surprised, he gets that his reflexes and skills are way above what he thought. Zinc fights hard against the goblins, moving with speed and strength boosted by his enchantments. He realizes he's finally unleashing the true power of his magic. After defeating the goblins, Zinc realizes he leveled up. Even though he was expelled and banished, he decides to keep moving forward, determined to see how far his skills can take him in this new life. Zinc faces the scene of death around him and, despite the initial shock, accepts that this is normal in that world. Taking a deep breath, he calms himself and decides to move on, now more prepared to deal with this new reality. Zinc understands that in that world it's normal, and even encouraged to take the belongings of those killed by monsters, since otherwise everything would just get looted. He decides to get used to this, and even considers taking items from dead monsters as part of his survival, showing that he's quickly adapting to the harsh rules of his new reality. Zinc understands that, to be recognized as an adventurer, he needs to prove his hunts by collecting parts from the monsters he kills. He quickly gets used to this process, and by the time he arrives at the city of Rio, he's already defeating goblins and kobolds naturally, like it's second nature. Zinc notices he can't enchant the same piece of equipment twice, so he carries several swords in his inventory. He checks his status, satisfied with how fast he's leveling up, as his level has increased a lot and his enchantment skill reached level 8. Zinc enchants his sword, boosting his sword skill by +8, and decides to keep the old one as a backup. The next day, he reaches the eastern forests of the Movitz Margravate, where several adventurers are camped. Zinc finds a resting spot for adventurers and decides to camp there before continuing his journey to Movisburg, which would take a whole day. While drinking a mana potion, a desperate group of adventurers appears, asking for help because one of them is dying and urgently needs a special potion. A desperate group of adventurers asks for an X potion to save their wounded companion. Even knowing it's expensive, Zinc decides to help since he checked the guy's status and saw he wasn't a criminal. He offers his own potion and asks how many would be needed, being seen as a true lifesaver. Zinc gives the X potion to the seriously injured adventurer, making sure he has a chance to survive. Even though he's never used one before, he realizes the situation is critical, and the guy wouldn't make it without the potion. Still, he's unsure if the potion alone will be enough. The injured adventurer recovers, surprising the group and bringing his friends to tears. Alexander, the leader of the Dragon Tears group, a rank C team, thanks Zinc for the help and introduces himself in a laid-back way, asking to be called Alex. Alexander gives all the money the group has, but admits it's not enough to pay for an X potion. Zinc asks them to explain what happened, and Alexander reveals the disaster happened because they ran into a red ogre, An, extremely dangerous rank, a monster. Zinc thinks about the value of an X potion worth 5 gold coins or 5 million yen, realizing how being a noble gave him access to huge sums. Grateful for his friend's life, Alexander offers himself as a slave to pay the debt. But Zinc finds the idea weird and uncomfortable, even though he knows slavery is common in that world. A group of orcs shows up, attracted by the smell of blood, advancing in large numbers toward the adventurers. Alexander reacts in surprise, while Zinc decides to use his appraisal skill to check the enemy's stats and get ready for the fight. The orcs, classified as rank D, have decent strength and high athletics. But Zinc reveals his own status is way higher, trusting his skills to face the group alone. While the adventurers complain about their worn-out gear after fighting the Red Ogre, Zinc gets ready to show his true power, something he kept hidden until leaving the kingdom. On the battlefield, Zinc surprises everyone with his special skill. He summons several weapons from his box of holding and quickly hands them out to the adventurers around him. The group, shocked by his rare ability, realize he's way stronger than anyone would expect from a newbie adventurer. Zinc charges into battle fiercely, taking out rank D orcs with ease, impressing the other adventurers. Alexander and his group decide to back him up and join the fight at his side. The scene shows the exiled young man fighting skillfully, while the confidence and respect around him start to grow. Zinc notices the adventurers can handle themselves and decides to focus on defeating as many enemies as possible to level up. He pushes forward at full force, dropping orcs one after the other without losing his rhythm. Zinc comes face to face with an imposing presence. An Orc General appears before him, holding a huge hatchet and giving off a menacing aura. The protagonist realizes the danger when he checks its stats, a rank B enemy, with physical strength and leadership far beyond normal orcs. Zinc faces the Orc General, wondering if he can take on a rank B enemy by himself. The nearby adventurers are shocked to see him challenge the monster without hesitation, while Alexander watches in disbelief, calling out to him in the middle of the battle. Zinc fights the Orc General in an intense duel, managing to block its devastating attacks thanks to his enchanted gear. Even so, he realizes he's still not strong enough to beat such a powerful enemy on his own. Alexander attacks the Orc General to distract it, giving Zinc a chance to act. The monster roars in fury, while Zinc watches nervously at his ally's bravery. Alexander shouts the signal, and Zinc leaps with his sword, striking down on the Orc General as the monster roars and prepares to counterattack. With all his strength, Zinc drives his sword into the Orc General, even as the monster howls and tries to fight back. Determined, he refuses to give up, pushing the blade deeper as the enemy struggles. With a decisive blow, Zinc defeats the Orc General, who collapses to the ground dead. Relieved, he takes a deep breath while the other adventurers watch, impressed by his strength. With the general dead, the orcs start to retreat. Alex praises Zinc's strength, guessing he must be a high-level adventurer, but Zinc reveals he's only rank G. Alex offers him all the loot as payment for the potion, but Zinc only accepts half, admitting he could only win because Alex distracted the monster. As Zinc walks, the adventurers begin to recognize him as the banished son of House Norrand. Rumors and comments spread quickly, some underestimating him as just a spoiled rich kid. With a relaxed smile, Zinc confirms his identity, but makes it clear he's already given up his title, asking them not to treat him formally. Zinc asks Alexander about his plans, and the warrior explains they're heading to the capital, but will stop in Movitsburg to regroup. Jokingly, Alexander says he's now Zinc's slave, and insists on tagging along. Smiling, Zinc asks to join their group until they reach the city, since he's heading the same way. Zinc asks Alexander to look for his younger brother, Esther Norrand, when he gets to the capital. In return, he just asks Alexander to teach him the adventurer's code of conduct, refusing to make him a slave. Surprised by the simple request, Alexander gets emotional and hugs Zinc tightly, calling him a good guy. As Zinc stands out with his actions, 3 adventurers watch from afar. Among them, an elf archer comments that the boy isn't bad at all, recognizing the potential he's shown in such a short time. After defeating the horde of orcs, Zinc and the group continue their journey. Now, their destination is the capital of the Movits Margravate, Moviburg, where they'll carry on toward the next goal. The group reaches the Goblin Forest, a dark and dangerous place. Zinc watches closely, aware that this territory is full of lurking enemies. The adventurers push through the Goblin Forest when suddenly a rain of arrows hits them. Zinc notes that goblins alone aren't much of a threat, but in groups they're deadly. Then, a horde appears above, setting up an ambush. Zinc charges forward, sword in hand, promising to clear a path through the goblin horde. Confident, he goes on the attack, while Alex warns him to be careful. Zinc doesn't hesitate, cutting down goblins one after the other. His moves are fast and precise, taking down enemies from all sides and clearing a path with pure skill and determination. The adventurers organize themselves, with the lower ranks staying at the back while the stronger ones move up to face the goblins. Zinc notices the overwhelming number of enemies, but gets motivated by thinking about the rewards and experience he'll gain. The battle heats up as weapons clash and goblins start falling before them. After the intense fight, the group finally manages to make it through the forest, exhausted and almost out of strength. While everyone else is catching their breath, Zinc stays standing, calm and showing no signs of fatigue. The adventurers stare at him, surprised, remembering he was on the front lines the whole time. With a laid-back smile, Zinc just says maybe he's simply stronger than the rest. While the others wonder if all their training was pointless, Zinc reveals his real secret. He explains that he's been boosting his body with enchantments, raising his physical skills way beyond normal. Every part of his gear, from boots and gloves to his sword, is enchanted with extra power and swordcraft. He admits that enchanting is his special skill, so he's not lying when he says he's stronger. The others, stunned, realize he's really not your average person. Zinc is approached by a group of experienced adventurers. Karen, the leader of the Sacred Flame group, praises his strength after watching his fight with the orcs. Bogart also recognizes his power, though one guy insists he just has good gear. Surprised, he asks if Zinc is actually an enchanter. Zinc meets the members of the A-rank group Sacred Flame. Among them is Bogart, an experienced swordsman, and Karen, a super powerful elf with healing and archery skills. Impressed by their high stats, Zinc decides to take a closer look at their info while introducing himself to the group. Will, a high-level mage with the equipment appraisal skill, checks Zinc out and sees that almost all his gear is enchanted with plus 8-inch athletics. This leads him to conclude Zinc has to be an enchanter. Surprised to be found out, Zinc confirms he is one. Zinc surprises everyone by revealing he's an enchanter, which is rare on the continent. The adventurers immediately show interest and offer to pay him to enchant their gear. However, Zinc says he'll only accept if certain conditions are met, making them curious about what he'll ask for. Zinc lays down his condition. He wants a drop of blood from everyone who wants enchantments, making sure only the owner can use the gear. He explains that this prevents powerful weapons from ending up in the wrong hands. He also says that, after passing through Moverberg, he plans to head to the Kingdom of Qual. Zinc asks that no one reveal he's an enchanter until he reaches the Kingdom of Qual. Karen and Will agree, saying they'd be happy to have someone like him in their kingdom. As for payment, Zinc says he'll accept any fair price since he doesn't know the market rates. Zinc reveals he can do various enchantments, including swordcraft, spellcraft, athletics, and charisma. On top of that, he has rare skills like alchemy, appraisal, and storage box, all inherited since birth. He says he'll only use the appraisal skill to make personal use cards, surprising the other adventurers even more. The group of adventurers shows off their newly enchanted equipment made by Zinc. Each receives significant upgrades, weapons, clothes, and accessories, all powered up with extra skills like swordcraft, athletics, alchemy, charisma, and even a storage pouch. With that, they get ready, confident for the challenges ahead. Zinc, exhausted after creating so many enchanted items, hands over the appraisal cards requested by the adventurers. Even after drinking several mana potions, he keeps chugging more to handle the huge energy drain. Despite being clearly tired, he explains that enchanting just burns through a lot of mana, showing his determination to get the job done. The adventurers follow Zinc's instructions and put a few drops of blood on the enchantment cards. Instantly, the symbols light up, activating the magic. Surprised and impressed, they confirm that the process worked perfectly, recognizing Zinc's exceptional skill. Will asks if there's a way for the cards to also show their aptitudes, offering to pay extra. Zinc explains that aptitudes are way harder to measure than skills, and in the end, an innate aptitude is worthless if you never use it. Even so, interested by the idea of extra pay, he considers the possibility. Zinc finishes the deal satisfied, commenting that A-rank groups make great customers. Meanwhile, Will observes him with curiosity and points out that, as an enchanter, Zinc is basically a VIP and should have personal guards. Other adventurers look on with envy, recognizing how valuable he is. The adventurers are shocked when they find out Zinc is in exile and ask if he's a criminal. He says no, just that he was incompetent and antisocial, believing he was falsely accused. Alex steps in to defend him, saying Zinc is a good guy and he owes him for saving his party's lives. Zinc reveals not even his own family knows about his powers. If they did, they'd just use him for politics. He says he can't trust anyone anymore. Hearing that, the adventurers insist that's all the more reason for him to head to Quol, promising he won't have to deal with that kind of problem there. The adventurers decide to help Zinc cross the border, even knowing it's crawling with monsters. Karen promises that with him along, there won't be any problems. Zinc accepts the help and thanks them as the group gets ready to head out toward Moverberg, which is already close by. The group arrives at the border city of Moverberg. Zinc thinks there's almost no chance of being recognized there, far from his old life. With the money he earned from his enchantments, he's ready to put his profits to good use and keep moving forward. Zinc uses his earnings to shop in town. He buys all the alchemy components, potions, and the best weapons and armor available. The shopkeeper, impressed, realizes he's making a fortune off the kid, who doesn't hesitate to invest in his own growth. Zinc keeps shopping and asks for spears and armor one size smaller than his, revealing it's for someone else. The shopkeeper, understanding, assures him he's got exactly what Zinc needs, even if it's more expensive. The seller explains the armor is made from red dragon leather, and the spear is extremely powerful, guaranteeing there's nothing better in town. Confident, Zinc says he can handle it, revealing he can store everything by turning a small chest into a storage box. Zinc realizes this might be his last chance to send something to Esther. Determined, he decides to use the strongest enchantments he has at the moment, applying them to the equipment in front of him. Then, he drinks potions to recover his strength and handle the magical effort. The next morning near Moviberg, Zinc shows up exhausted after pushing his magic to the limit. Still, he hands out extra appraisal cards to Alex and his companions as a thank you. Even tired, he sees it as a chance to gain more enchanting experience, now having reached level 12. The adventurers decide to head out and cross the border to the next destination. Meanwhile, at the Norrand family estate, a conversation reveals that someone was sentenced to 50 days of solitary confinement. raising questions about the harshness of the punishment. Esther appears, isolated in his room, sad and deep in thought, calling out for his brother. Meanwhile, the Norand family's butler says he needs to forget Zinc, reminding him that he's now the family heir and needs to accept that responsibility. Esther is scolded by a strict man, who finds him lost in thought and calls him out directly. The man accuses Esther of feeling no remorse and then violently attacks him, throwing him against the wall. The man sentences Esther to 50 days of solitary confinement after Zinc's departure. Before that, he lets him say goodbye, but makes it clear that from then on, Zinc won't be recognized as his brother anymore. Stuck in his thoughts, Esther wonders how Zinc is doing and fears that he's all alone. Even so, he keeps faith that his brother will survive and make it out of the kingdom alive. Zinc fights fiercely against monsters, taking one down with a decisive blow. While attacking, he remembers Esther and dedicates the victory to his brother, showing he still carries that promise in his heart. One of the warriors charges at the orcs, slashing through them with force and dropping a huge enemy to the ground. His determination guarantees a clean and direct win in battle. During the fight against goblins, Karen shows off her archery skills, firing accurate arrows to protect her allies. Her precision gives the group an edge in the intense fight. Will jumps into the action during the fight, casting his Wind Slicer spell. The magic slices through the orc's body with precision, taking it out quickly and efficiently. After the battle, Zinc thinks about his magic and considers training more in fire, but is worried about causing too much destruction. Will mentions that as an enchanter, Zinc should rank up quickly. Meanwhile, Karen and Bogart come back after clearing their side of the fight, noting the remaining monsters have fled. Zinc asks how low-level adventurers or merchants manage to cross such dangerous borders. While walking the road, Zinc and the group talk about the dangers of the border. Karen mentions that low-level adventurers rarely make it this far, since the area is full of monsters, and even a wyvern lives here. Zinc hopes they don't run into it, but Karen reassures him they're already close to the border. Zinc and the group arrive at the checkpoint in the border city of Quolta, while he worries he won't be allowed in because he's in exile. Karen and Bogart promise that as high-level adventurers, they can help Zinc get through with no problem since their influence is equal to nobles. Even so, Zinc is worried about getting into trouble at the checkpoint. At the checkpoint, Zinc introduces himself as Zinc Nonrand, but says he's been disowned and is just a commoner now. Still, the guards recognize him and, suspicious of how quickly he got there, try to detain him right away. At the checkpoint, the guards try to question Zinc, but Karen steps in and says he was just following his exile order. When the soldiers talk back disrespectfully, they're shocked to find out she's a rank S adventurer. Karen intimidates the guards, threatening to put them in their place by force if needed. The soldiers panic, apologize, and run to get the person in charge. Meanwhile, Zinc tries to calm things down, but soon someone familiar to the group arrives to welcome them. Zinc realizes his family really wanted to get rid of him, and now they're trying to frame him for attempted murder of the Duke to steal the inheritance. The checkpoint guards are suspicious about how fast he arrived and use that as an excuse to accuse him of being a criminal. Will stands up for Zinc, saying they traveled together for 3 days and he never did anything shady, only showing kindness. He adds that arriving in just 5 days proves Zinc's talent. The guard, still unsure, ends up letting it go, asking Zinc to use the noble checkpoint next time to avoid problems, closing the case. Zinc finally crosses the border and enters the kingdom of Quol, relieved to have made it. He thanks Will and Karen for their help at the checkpoint, saying he wouldn't have gotten through without them. Will says it's just a fair trade, reinforcing their partnership. Will warns Zinc about the danger if Rosarda finds out he's an enchanter, suggesting they could try to hunt him down or force him back. Because of that, he proposes a bold solution, that Zinc officially register with the guild rankings and reveal to the world he's an enchanter, turning his secret identity into public recognition. Zinc thinks over the suggestion and realizes that revealing his identity as an enchanter might be the best way to stay safe. Will says that once he's registered as a Qual adventurer, Rosarda won't be able to act against him. So, the group decides to head to the guild. Zinc gives Karen a bracelet with a healing enchantment as practice. Soon after, the group reaches the Korta Guild branch, where Zinc is called inside. In the guild, Karen draws attention and is greeted respectfully, while some people seem annoyed to see Zinc so close to her. Will introduces Zinc as someone wanting to rank up and register his class, catching the receptionist's attention. Zinc decides to go all in and attacks Snow head-on. He spins with force, trying to catch his opponent off guard and shift the momentum of the fight, showing he's not backing down. Zinc manages to land a direct hit on Snow, injuring his hand and shocking everyone in the arena. The guildmaster, recognizing the kid's strength and determination, admits defeat and yields. The audience reacts in shock and surprise, as Zinc proves himself and earns respect from everyone. Everyone in the arena is stunned to see Snow, the respected guildmaster, wounded by Zinc. The crowd whispers, surprised that the failure from House Norland managed such a feat. Karen offers to heal Snow, but he refuses, saying a potion will do, even though he's clearly shaken from losing to a kid. Karen, excited, insists on healing Zinc as a reward for passing the exam, even though he says he isn't really hurt. The moment leaves Zinc embarrassed and awkward, but happy at the same time. Meanwhile, some onlookers talk about the situation. One praises Zinc's achievement, while others look on enviously, bothered by all the attention he's getting. Will pressures Zinc to explain how he won the duel, hinting he wants to expose him. Nervous, Zinc tries to justify it by saying he just enchanted his gear. Then Will takes the opportunity to announce loudly that Zinc is an enchanter, making it clear to everyone that, even so, he won fair and square, exposing his true power to the crowd. During the reveal at the exam, everyone is shocked to learn that Zinc's swordcraft skill is actually 175, something considered crazy. Will continues to expose more. Besides being an enchanter, Zinc also has the rare appraise skill, proving it by showing he had already read their statuses. The audience goes wild, shocked that there's a fourth enchanter in the world when everyone thought there were only 3. Snow acknowledges Zinc's strength and admits that, without the enchantments, he wouldn't have lost. As guildmaster, he officially recognizes Zinc as both an enchanter and appraiser. Zinc, for his part, says he learned a lot from the fight, while Snow, relieved, promises to train harder to get stronger. Zinc celebrates being promoted to provisional C rank, but is confused about the condition. Will explains that, since Zinc is an enchanter, he can apply straight for S rank without more questions or tests. Will explains the exam was just a security check. Because Zinc's skill is so rare and valuable, if he were registered at a low rank, he'd be a target for abuse. That's why he's provisional C rank, until the official paperwork is done. If the kingdom decided he couldn't protect himself, they'd assign royal guards to follow him everywhere, which would be a huge hassle. Zinc asks Will why he's doing so much for him. Will says they needed to show everyone Zinc can defend himself, solving 2 problems at once. Zinc wonders about Will's real motives, and Will, with a slight smile, just says, honestly, and leaves it hanging. Zinc thinks about his life after exile, wondering if his skill would be enough to change everything. He thinks about how he could turn his life around by relying on his unique abilities. Will then reveals that Zinc isn't just an enchanter, but also an appraiser, hinting that this combo could get him to S rank. Zinc learns about the SS rank, a level above S rank, where adventurers aren't limited by politics or society and earn respect equal to a king. Even though he has a long way to go, he gets the encouragement to try for that goal. He then reflects on his past, rejected, exiled from Rosarda as a fugitive, but now he's starting to see a real shot at changing his fate. Confident, Zinc decides to leave the past behind and embrace his future as an enchanter, aiming to reach SS rank. Zinc travels by carriage with his companions, but spends his time studying, writing formulas, and notes to improve his enchanting skills. While Zinc focuses on his upcoming exams, the caravan is attacked by kobolds. His companions immediately jump into action to protect the carriage and make sure he doesn't get hurt. Zinc decides to join the fight against the kobolds, seeing it as a perfect chance to test out his S-rank water magic, showing confidence and determination to help his allies. Zinc casts his water magic, creating a huge sphere and launching it at the kobolds. The attack lands, drenching and knocking the enemies down, showing off the power of his S-rank magic. Zinc notices his first attack didn't work, and the kobolds keep advancing. He focuses, remembering his training. His magic shouldn't just be regular water, but something solid and fast, like a cannonball. Zinc puts all his strength into the next spell, now with much more accuracy. He fires a powerful water ball, a compact, fast-moving sphere that hits the enemies like a projectile. The attack lands dead on, smashing trees and scattering the enemies. The kobolds are terrified by the power they just witnessed. Seeing the opening, his allies charge in confidently, shouting that this is their chance, while the monsters freeze in fear from the attack. The adventurers praise Zinc, impressed by his spell's power. He explains he was born with high affinity for water magic and realizes he needs to be careful, since a hit like that could even hit his allies. Even as the guards apologize for interrupting his studies, Zinc says it's fine and treats the fight as good training, reminding himself he's on his way to Quoll's capital for his exams. A week after the duel exam, the group arrives at Count Brand's mansion, where they'll stay the night. Bogart greets them at the entrance, saying everything is ready. Zinc looks around curiously as Will explains they'll be staying there. Zinc feels uneasy about meeting a noble, but Will explains that Count Brand is a populist, different from arrogant nobles, and always looked after him when he was a rookie. A maid leads them through the hallways to the master's room, mentioning the group's name, Sacred Flame. The group is greeted by Nicolaus Brand, the Count of Qual. He welcomes Zinc respectfully, but Zinc asks not to be treated so formally, saying that even though he made S-rank earlier than expected, he still sees himself as a newbie. Brand accepts and greets him more casually. During dinner at Count Brand's mansion, he welcomes Zinc and the Sacred Flame members warmly, inviting them to enjoy the meal. Zinc is excited about the food, praising the banquet. At dinner, Zinc reflects on how he's been living and eating, simply outdoors, and now has to hold back from overeating. Count Brand asks about his future plans. Zinc says that for now, he'll stay in Qual to level up, but eventually wants to settle in the neighboring kingdom, Yamato. Zinc says he wants to enroll in the Royal Academy of Yamato, since he's only 14. Even though he's reached S-rank sooner than expected, he says he doesn't want to be stuck in one place. He wants to travel and see the world. Count Brand assures him that as an S-rank, he no longer needs to fear Rosarda. Count Brand suggests Zinc visit Qualart, the capital. There, he could try to get into the prestigious Royal Academy of Qual, a very selective school where his talents might get him in. Count Brand also suggests that if Zinc wants to gain experience as an adventurer, he should visit Gamma, the city of the Labyrinth, built over a huge underground maze with more than 80 floors. Zinc had already heard about this place before. Zinc gets excited about adventuring in the Labyrinth, but is warned that nobody's ever reached the bottom, since it's filled with endless monsters of every kind. At the same time, he's reminded he needs to study a lot to get into the Royal Academy. Still, he trusts that, if he uses his time well, he can balance training, adventure, and studying. Count Brand offers big support to Zinc. He guarantees he can travel freely through noble territories, offers his house in Qualart to study, and promises to send letters to help him avoid trouble. He even plans to assign a team of adventurers as guards, and says his son, who's Zinc's age and also prepping for the exam, could become his friend. Zinc is surprised by so much help. Zinc thinks about how he's not used to being treated so kindly, which makes him a bit uncomfortable. He remembers his previous life as Jinkaru, where he just repeated the same days with no ambition. Now, with new opportunities, he feels that excitement for dreams again and tries to motivate himself. Determined, he says he won't waste his life anymore and thanks them, promising to make his dreams real with their support. The Sacred Flame group says goodbye to Zinc, thanking him for everything. They say that after visiting Zinc's brother, they'll return to Qualart and then head to Rosarda. Before leaving, they wish Zinc good luck, hoping to meet again in the future. Zinc continues his journey by carriage, and even with setbacks, everything is going well. As he studies hard, he remembers his past life as Jinkuro, an exhausted worker, but who learned to always give his best, something he's now applying to his training and studies. Zinc keeps up his intense routine. When he's given shelter by populists, he focuses on studying. On the road, he fights monsters, and after beating them, camps out to keep studying without rest, always focused on improving. Zinc finally arrives at Qualart. During the journey, he never stops studying, even while dealing with checkpoints. To thank the nobles and the group that traveled with him, he creates enchanted items and appraisal cards for each of them, showing his dedication and gratitude. Zinc is amazed at the huge gates and walls of Qualart, much bigger than the capital of Rosarda. Excited, he wants to explore the city, but the guards hold him back, reminding him of their duty to protect him. They decide to take him to Count Brand's residence until his exams are over. Zinc arrives at Count Brand's main house, where he's warmly welcomed by the Count's wife, Arya, and son, Chris. They show respect and hospitality, saying the house is simple, but asking him to feel at home. Zinc, in turn, asks to be treated casually, showing humility. Chris tries to show Zinc around the mansion, but Zinc passes out from exhaustion. The non-stop grind of training and studying finally catches up, showing his biggest weakness. Even with all his determination, his body can't keep up with the intense pace he forces on himself. At the royal palace of Qual, the king receives news that there's an enchanter in his kingdom. He's told that this young man wants to enroll at the Royal Academy of Qual. Intrigued, the king decides to personally investigate the truth and potential of this new talent. Zinc, at 14 years old, collapses after pushing his abilities to the limit. His status shows his impressive level 62 and various strong skills, especially in water magic, healing, and enchantment. However, his excessive use of the appraise skill, already maxed out, leaves him exhausted, while those around him panic and call for a doctor. Ready to prove his abilities, the protagonist sits in the exam hall of the Royal Academy of Qual, surrounded by other candidates. The entrance exam for the magic department begins, and he prepares to start. The protagonist works through the written exam at the Royal Academy of Qual. Despite its reputation for being difficult, he finds the questions manageable, thanks to accurate predictions he had. Around him, other students struggle, some exhausted from overstudying. He knows that most candidates fail during the practical test and keeps his focus, determined not to make mistakes when that moment comes. The written exam ends, and the candidates move outside for the practical test. They are asked to display their magic, with evaluation based on variety, strength, and rarity. The protagonist steps forward confidently, his number called, and his connection to a renowned S-rank adventurer is acknowledged, drawing attention to him. The protagonist draws attention as others whisper about his connection to an S-rank adventurer. Some wonder about his family background, impressed by his potential. An elder appraiser named Dusty Panam steps in to verify his abilities, confirming that he indeed possesses both enchantment and appraisal skills. Relieved, the boy feels confident that his talents will be properly recognized. The protagonist's abilities are revealed through appraisal, showing strong water magic and healing spells, including some rare techniques. Though slightly uneasy about being analyzed, he remains composed. The examiner then requests a demonstration of his magic to properly evaluate his skills. The protagonist steps forward for his demonstration. Channeling his mana, he forms a sphere of water between his hands, skillfully controlling its shape and flow. Observers watch closely as he begins his test with the water ball spell, showing both confidence and precision in his magic. The protagonist completes his demonstration, impressing everyone with powerful water spells, especially the water cyclone. However, the display ends up drenching the entire venue, causing some concern. While others joke about his overwhelming performance, he worries about losing points for going overboard. Still, he senses that the examiner, a high-ranking noble, will likely report his abilities in full to the king. The examiner reports directly to the King of Qual, describing the protagonist as not only an enchanter, but also skilled in swordsmanship and athletics. His possession of a rare extra-large item box is also noted. The king listens carefully, aware that such talents will soon become widely recognized, especially by influential figures like Rosarda. In the royal court, the King of Qual receives a report about the protagonist's performance. His extraordinary theoretical score and magical talent astonish the nobles, marking him as a prodigy destined to surpass others in the academy. The king acknowledges his skills but raises concern about his character, while advisors insist that such a talent must be secured for Qual at all costs. Rumors about the protagonist's past surface, claiming he once tried to poison his own father. Some nobles express doubt about allowing someone with such a reputation to remain in Qual. However, the examiner clarifies that appraisal showed no criminal status on him, only the label of dropout. He suggests that the accusations were false and that the boy's exile may have been unjust, defending his character before the king. The council discusses the protagonist's past and exile. They conclude that his strained relations with nobles and his lack of spear skill alone could not justify such punishment. The king realizes that Rosarda must have had hidden motives and exiled him without knowing he was actually an enchanter. Determined to clarify matters, the king orders that the boy be summoned for an audience. The king declares that the protagonist, Zinc the Enchanter, will be granted asylum in Qual, while warning that his talents must not be exploited for personal gain. Days later, the results of the exam are announced. Zinc passes with distinction, earning one of the few coveted spots in the top track. His peers celebrate his success, acknowledging both his overwhelming performance and the unusual circumstances of his test. The protagonist prepares for his upcoming audience with the king. Having sold most of his noble possessions to fund his journey, he realizes he has little suitable attire left. He decides to go shopping, planning to buy essentials for life in the school dorms and equipment for dungeon exploration, using the money he earned from creating appraisal cards. At the Qual slave market, the protagonist searches for people to accompany him. A group of slaves is presented, with more brought forward to complete the selection. He observes them quietly, considering who to take with him for his future plans. At the slave market, the protagonist reflects on how common the practice is in Qual, though he remains uncomfortable with it. He searches for someone with high aptitude, ideally suited for magic or combat. Among the group, one girl stands out, presented last, immediately catching his attention as a promising choice. At the slave market, the protagonist notices a frail girl named Nina, who had once been intended for prostitution but was injured during transport. Now, she is sold as a regular slave. Deciding quickly, he chooses her despite her condition. The transaction is completed, and he is asked to perform the ritual of servitude by applying a drop of his blood to bind her. In a ritual circle, the binding ceremony begins. The girl, Nina, receives a drop of the protagonist's blood on her throat, activating the magic contract. Symbols glow across her body as the servitude mark takes form, sealing her as his slave. The binding ritual finishes, and Nina becomes the protagonist's servant. With the transaction complete, he takes her with him from the market. Later, at an estate on the outskirts, he sits down with her, beginning a conversation to learn more about her past and who she really is. Nina opens up about her past. She reveals she was born into a poor farming family, but during a harsh winter, her family ran out of money. To survive, they sold her into slavery. While her parents may have struggled with the decision, her stepfather dismissed her entirely, calling it good riddance. Her story exposes the harsh circumstances that led her to her current fate. The protagonist realizes Nina's past mirrors his own. Just like him, she was abandoned by her family, cast aside by her stepfather. This shared pain makes him see her differently, recognizing a bond in their similar fates. The protagonist sets clear terms for Nina's freedom and treatment, assuring her he won't abuse his authority. When invited to ask questions, she hesitantly brings up knightly services, unsure if he expects such demands from her. Her words reveal the scars of her past and a fear of being seen as nothing more than property. Nina breaks down, feeling overwhelmed and worthless. She admits she can't read, write, or do physical labor skills others dismissed her for. Her frustration spills out as she reveals she was sold off because she was deemed useless, desperately questioning how she can be of any value. The protagonist offers Nina an X potion, a rare item capable of healing deep scars. Shocked, she insists it's too valuable for someone like her, but he calmly orders her to drink it. His intention is clear. He wants to start by restoring her, not as a tool, but as a person. The protagonist reveals that he used his appraisal ability to choose Nina for a reason, her hidden talent in cooking. Despite her low level and lack of confidence, he sees her potential. Her stats confirm strong aptitude in housework, especially in cooking and childcare, giving her real value with the right training. The protagonist shares his goal and tells Nina he'll need her help to achieve it. He reassures her of her worth, offering care and clothes as she heals. Though uncertain, she starts to believe she might have a place by his side. Nina quickly adapts to her new life. With the cooking lessons arranged by the protagonist, she shows surprising progress, impressing even the staff. Her gratitude grows as she feels purpose for the first time, while the protagonist quietly acknowledges her improvement with a faint smile. Nina, now in a maid outfit, proudly presents a jar of cookies she made, eager for the protagonist's feedback. Her growth is clear, having quickly adapted and impressed others with her cooking skills. Meanwhile, the protagonist discusses his need for more capable slaves, specifically those with combat experience, as he continues funding his plans through potion crafting and alchemy sales. In a dark, isolated prison known as Outlaw's Hollow, a slave correctional facility, a muscular young man sits chained to the wall. Worn down and silent, he endures his confinement, waiting in a place reserved for the most dangerous or discarded individuals. Now, settled in the academy dorms, the protagonist considers his next steps. Though the room is meant for one, he plans to bring Nina and another servant. With space tight and expenses rising, he decides he needs a combat-capable slave and more income to support his goals. On his first day of class at the academy, the protagonist is greeted by Chris and notices the attention he's getting. Rumors about his S-rank adventurer status and looks have already spread among the students, especially impressing the girls. Despite the flexible attendance policy for top students, his presence still turns heads across campus. As he walks through the academy halls, the protagonist becomes the center of attention. Girls openly gossip about him, some even fantasizing about marriage or being his mistress. Chris teases him about the popularity, but the protagonist remains unsure whether this sudden shift from his past life in Rosarda is really for the better. The protagonist grows wary of the attention he's receiving, realizing many of the girls are more interested in his wealth and status than in him. Observing their desperation to marry up, he criticizes their dependence on others, believing they should earn their own way, especially since magical power is equal between genders. At the academy, the protagonist is approached by a confident girl who introduces herself as Najenda Kwol, a top student in the law department. She casually mentions placing second in the entrance exam and hopes they get along as fellow freshmen. Shocked, the protagonist realizes she's the crown princess of Kwol, completely caught off guard by her sudden appearance. Students gather in awe as Princess Najenda humbly asks them to treat her like any other freshman. The protagonist keeps things casual, stating that he'll be busy with expeditions as an adventurer and likely won't be around much. Najenda shares her own royal duties, planning to assist with national affairs during her time at the academy, leaving a strong impression on everyone around. At the academy, a noble student exploits his status to intimidate and extort money from a classmate. His abuse of power is noted by others, who reveal he's been using his title since middle school to get his way. The bully came from a powerful family known for covering up his actions. Despite causing multiple student expulsions, he avoided punishment. When Zinc stepped in, the situation shifted, and the princess took direct interest in speaking with him. Ransel, arrogant and entitled, tries to recruit Zinc to serve his noble house, treating him like a tool. Zinc, clearly disgusted, remembers his time on the battlefield and coldly rejects the offer, warning him not to touch him. Ransel, furious at being defied, tries to intimidate Zinc by demanding submission. Instead, Zinc strikes first, landing a clean blow to his face and shocking everyone around. Ransel, humiliated, vows to fight back, using his boxing skills, framing it as a matter of honor, while the students watch in stunned silence. Zinc quickly defeated the arrogant noble student, leaving him bloodied and humiliated. He reminded everyone that at the academy, family status meant nothing, only track placement determined authority. Since the noble was from Track 3 and had insulted him, a Track 1 student, Zinc declared his punishment fully justified. With the matter settled, Zinc and the others left the scene while whispers spread among the students. Najenda approached Zinc, praising his composure after the incident and extending an invitation from her father for a royal audience. Though grateful, Zinc admitted his funds were tight and he had nothing suitable to wear. Najenda reassured him, suggesting he at least buy a new cape, while expressing confidence that his status as an adventurer would make his presence more than acceptable. Zinc was summoned before the King of Qual. A few days later, he entered the royal hall and bowed respectfully, introducing himself. The king, Nomil Qual, welcomed him and acknowledged his reputation, mentioning the nobles who had been pestering Zinc for appraisal cards. Zinc replied humbly, saying it was good business for him. The king, pleased, hinted that he also wanted enchantments and appraisals from Zinc, showing interest in his abilities. Zinc offered his skills to the king, who acknowledged his value. The conversation shifted when the king mentioned hearing about Zinc's clash with the son of House Ransel. Zinc confidently compared the bully to another man he once knew, implying a history of dealing with similar arrogance. The king spoke of how Brogy had always abused his power, making others miserable. Zinc admitted his actions in the quarrel were reckless and asked to be punished as the king saw fit. The king revealed it was a test, assuring him neither he nor Najenda minded. Still, Zinc insisted he couldn't simply let such behavior slide. Zinc meets the King of Qual in an official audience. The king acknowledges Zinc's achievements and rare power, expressing relief that he doesn't seem the type to abuse it. Impressed with his top performance at the academy, the king offers him a reward of his choice. Zinc boldly requests permission to purchase a slave from the commercial slave correctional facility, surprising the king with such an unusual request. Zinc kneels before the king, thisisAvideo.com, explaining that he is gathering slaves in preparation for his upcoming expedition into the Gamma Labyrinth and wants to consider every option. The king questions why he insists on slaves rather than hiring normal servants. Zinc clarifies that slaves are more trustworthy, as hiring adventurers or common servants carries the risk of them being Rosarda's spies. To avoid betrayal and ensure his safety, he chooses this path. Zinc meets with the king, who ensures everything is in order and allows him entry into the commercial slave correctional facility. Accompanied by Nina, Zinc prepares to search for new slaves, hoping to find someone suitable for his plans. The king views him as a sensible ally, looking forward to a fruitful relationship. Zinc, Nina, and the guard entered the grim correctional facility, its atmosphere heavy with the cries and rage of prisoners. The place was unsettling, with broken men locked away in despair. While Nina trembled at the sight, clinging in fear, Zinc remained composed, unfazed by the darkness around them. Inside the correctional facility, Zinc and Nina are guided through the grim halls by a guard. Nina clings nervously to him, unsettled by the atmosphere, while the cries and madness of prisoners echo from the cells. The sight of broken inmates reinforces the cruelty of the place, leaving Nina frightened, but Zinc remains composed, expecting such conditions. Zinc visited the correctional facility where he was introduced to a prisoner named Ian, and one 8-year-old with remarkable strength and skills despite his convict status. Ian's stats revealed high aptitude in persuasion, disarming, and material appraisal, along with strong potential for growth. Intrigued, Zinc requested to speak directly with him. The chained young man reveals he was once heir to a merchant family, but clashed with his stepmother, who plotted to disinherit him. Their conflict escalated until she attacked him with a knife, leading him to kill her in self-defense. Now imprisoned, his value as a slave is revealed to be extraordinarily high, worth 53 platinum pieces. Zinc considered the convict's stats, realizing they were too valuable to ignore, though the cost would drain him. The guard explained that Ian's crime, though self-defense, left nobles uneasy, and his father's attempts to reclaim him only inflated his price. Despite his strength and potential, Ian remained unsold due to his high cost and reputation. Nina notices Ian's intimidating presence, but realizes he isn't as frightening as he looks. Despite his chained state and past, she feels no fear toward him, showing a quiet trust and empathy that surprises Zinc. Zinc decided to purchase Ian, recognizing his potential despite his past. Afterward, Zinc reflected on the unexpected generosity of the king, who had granted him an entire estate as part of his support. Zinc continues managing his new life after gaining the king's favor. Chris helps him secure many appraisal card orders, showing how his reputation is growing fast. Meanwhile, Nina improves her reading through cookbooks and even learns to prepare unusual dishes like orc meat, surprising everyone with her skills. Ian trained with his sword and wind magic, showing steady progress that matched his high potential. Zinc observed him, noting his growth but also sensing a heavy burden weighing on Ian. Though he had offered Ian the chance to speak openly, the young man kept his thoughts to himself. As they prepared to head into town, Zinc considered finding the right moment to draw him out during their trip. A cloaked figure hides in the shadows, watching closely from an alley. Meanwhile, Zinc and Ian walked together through the busy town streets, unaware of being observed. Zinc and Ian were out in town, managing supplies and gear for their preparations. As Zinc reminded him of his responsibilities, Ian's emotions reached a breaking point. Overwhelmed, he suddenly burst out, unable to keep his feelings bottled up any longer. Ash, Ian's younger brother, suddenly appeared, demanding Ian's release and pointing his weapon at Zinc. The crowd watched in shock as he shouted defiantly, despite his weak stats compared to Ian. Zinc quickly appraised him, realizing Ash was far weaker and labeled as a lesser version of his brother. In the middle of the town square, Ash, Ian's younger brother, bursts forward, demanding Ian's freedom and challenges Zinc. Ash's immaturity and inexperience are clear compared to Zinc, who calmly asserts his status as a royally endorsed S-rank adventurer and reminds everyone of the price he paid to buy Ian. The crowd watches as the tension between them rises. Ian, chained and weary, admits he could never look his master in the eye, showing his broken spirit. Zinc observes him calmly, while Nina, sensing his true nature, insists he isn't frightening. Despite Ian's past, she feels no fear toward him, revealing a quiet trust. Ian's younger brother suddenly bursts out in anger, demanding his release and challenging Zinc. The boy's immaturity contrasts with Zinc's calm stance as an S-rank adventurer. Despite the boy's rage, Zinc reminds everyone that Ian was bought fairly with a high price, leaving Ian conflicted as he watches his younger brother's outburst. Ash, driven by anger, challenges Zinc to a fight, demanding his brother's freedom. Zinc accepts calmly, ready to face him, while Ian and the crowd watch the tense clash about to begin. Zinc and Ash clashed fiercely, their weapons meeting with sharp strikes. In the heat of battle, Ash's weapon suddenly broke apart, leaving him vulnerable. Zinc quickly closed in, his presence overwhelming the younger boy, who realized he was at a severe disadvantage. Zinc swiftly countered Ash's reckless charge, disarming him in an instant. Ash fell to the ground, stunned by the overwhelming difference in skill. Ian watched silently, while the crowd looked on in shock at how easily the fight was decided. Zinc defeats Ash with ease, leaving him on the ground humiliated. Before things escalate further, guild enforcers intervene, quickly restraining Ash. They confirm Zinc's safety and explain they were alerted by a civilian report, while Ash angrily resists their hold. Zinc was asked to go to the guild for questioning, while Ian was told he could return home. With some unease, Zinc agreed to go, leaving his belongings behind. Ian, worried, called out to his master as Zinc quietly returned to his estate. Nina runs in crying, telling Zinc that Ian is about to die. Shocked, Zinc demands to know what's happening. Without hesitation, he rushes out, calling for Ian as panic builds. Your request Ian after his breakdown, demanding that he atone. Instead of punishment, Zinc declared that Ian would serve him, carrying his burdens and protecting him in the labyrinth. Ian, stunned, realized this strict discipline bound him to a new purpose. Zinc sets strict conditions for Ian to stay alive, warning him not to act on his own or be reckless. Ian gratefully accepts, vowing to work himself to the bone. Nina, relieved, asks if Ian can remain, and Zinc reassures her by forgiving him. She feels comforted, thankful that Ian's life is spared. Zinc discussed Ash's punishment with Ian, learning the guild would hold him for a few days without real consequences. Ian admitted Ash was spoiled as the stepson of his stepmother, but still considered him precious. Zinc reflected on the idea of younger brothers, revealing he too had one named Esther, though in his case he was seen as the family's black sheep. Zinc thinks about how Ian's younger brother might be doing, while Ian, weakened, is urged to eat something. The scene shifts to the guild building, where concern lingers over his condition. A boy sits beside a bedridden woman named Urza, gently holding her hand. Though she looks worried, he reassures her with a calm smile, expressing confidence that their older brother is doing well. Esther recalls how Urza cared for his brother as her own son and leaves the room, but the butler stops him. The butler warns him not to wander without reason and points out Esther's lingering attachment to his disgraced brother. He then instructs him to return soon, as dinner will be served shortly. The butler dismisses Ian as nothing more than a criminal, urging Esther to forget him. Esther reflects that without Ian, the butler has no one left to torment. He recalls the petty cruelties Ian once endured, like hidden belongings and nails in his shoes. actions he knows were done under family orders. Confronting the butler, Esther calls it out as small-minded, leaving the man grumbling in silence. The eldest son of House Nonrand was known as a dropout, but the truth was different. He had rigorous spear training and was highly skilled, inspiring others through his dedication. He excelled in both combat and academics, achieving top grades and working tirelessly for his accomplishment. Despite rumors, his efforts proved otherwise. Esther recalls his past with his older brother. Despite being labeled a dropout, his brother trained hard and excelled with the spear, becoming an inspiration. Esther secretly watched and improved himself, admiring his brother's dedication. Eventually, Esther surpassed him in sparring matches, winning repeatedly even when ordered to fight again. What began as practice soon showed Esther's natural skill, while his brother admitted struggling to keep up with his precise strikes. Esther remembered how his older brother, despite being humiliated by losing to him, never treated him poorly. Instead, he continued showing kindness and support, acting the same as always. Esther thought that if things had stayed like that, their bond might never have been broken. Esther remembers how things turned against his brother. Once admired for his skills and hard work, his brother's reputation began to crumble when their grandfather started isolating him and labeling him a dropout. As the grandfather's favor shifted toward Esther, everything his brother had status, respect, and place in society was lost. Esther blames himself, believing he took it all away. Esther reflects on recent events, wondering what's happening as it has been several days since his father and grandfather were summoned to the palace. Meanwhile, at Rosarda Palace, the nobles demand accountability, pressing the family on how they intend to take responsibility. The nobles hold a heated discussion at the palace. The former head of House Nonrand, furious and frustrated, emphasizes that exiling an enchanter based on false accusations was a disastrous mistake. Another official points out that the man fled to Qual, a land with strained relations, making retrieval nearly impossible. The weight of the blunder hangs heavily over the council. At the royal court, nobles debated the consequences of Zinc's wrongful exile. The Governor General declared it a grave mistake to banish an enchanter over false accusations, noting the strain it caused with other nations. The former head of House Nonrand, visibly troubled, acknowledged the difficulty of retrieving him. Crown Prince Elliot dismissed the matter impatiently, while the king stayed silent, leaving others to shoulder blame as co-conspirators. In the royal court, tension rose as discussions about the exile unfolded. Some nobles called it a catastrophic mistake, while others pointed out the difficulty of retrieving someone who had fled to hostile territory. The former head of House Nonrand expressed his frustration, while the Crown Prince dismissed the concerns with arrogance, twisting the situation into a possibility that he and the king could also be considered enchanters. The king, however, sternly tried to put an end to his reckless words. The three trained together in the courtyard, blades and shield in hand. Zinc, tied by blood to their lineage, stands at the center of their bond. With determination, they resolve that to match their heritage, they must become enchanters themselves. The truth shocks the court. Elliot reveals that Zinc is actually the king's illegitimate son. The council reacts with disbelief, while the king himself is caught off guard, demanding an explanation. Elliot smugly admits the truth, excusing his actions with a mocking apology to his father. The Crown Prince reveals he had eavesdropped on a secret conversation between the king and noble Nonrand. With arrogance, he declares his intent to become the kingdom's beacon of hope. Full of ambition, he orders his retainers to gather the realm's best sages and sorcerers, determined to pursue his new goal. The Crown Prince loudly declared his ambition, claiming he and the king could become enchanters as well. He imagined this as the path to becoming a beacon of hope for the kingdom. The king and nobles, however, were left in shock, reacting with disbelief and unease to his outburst. The council erupts in chaos after Elliot's reckless declaration. Nobles demand explanations from the king, while panic spreads about Zinc being revealed as the king's illegitimate son. The opposing faction worries that the truth will ruin them, realizing too late that exiling Zinc was a grave mistake. Esther reflects on the sins of the royal family and House Nonrand while reading. He is informed that a group of S-rank adventurers, calling themselves Sacred Flame, has come specifically to see him, not his father or grandfather. Surprised, he agrees to let them in. A group of adventurers from Qual, calling themselves Sacred Flame, arrives to meet Esther. They bring a delivery sent by Zinc, surprising Esther with news tied to dragon tears, and Qual's guild openly spreading word about it. Esther is left stunned, realizing the significance of the situation. Esther receives the adventurers, who reveal surprising news. Zinc is alive and living comfortably in the city of Korta. Shocked and emotional, Esther struggles to process it while the adventurers confirm the truth of their words. Esther, while reading, is informed that adventurers of high rank, known as Sacred Flame, have come specifically to see him. Surprised they sought him instead of his father or grandfather, he allows them to enter. Esther listens as the adventurers reveal shocking news. Zinc is alive and thriving in the city of Korda. Relieved, Esther is moved to tears, grateful that his brother is safe. The adventurers then share an even greater surprise. Zinc has become the world's 4th enchanter, leaving Esther stunned by the revelation. Esther and the others gathered, reflecting on Zinc's hidden abilities. They realized he could perform appraisal and alchemy, which explained why his blood was so valuable. Shock and embarrassment filled the room, especially for those who had cared for him without knowing the truth. Still, it was clear Zinc had concealed his powers for a reason, and some believed he was right to do so. Urza explains that in their kingdom, spreading word of special powers would strip someone of their freedom. She admits she never realized this while caring for Zinc, feeling embarrassed. The adventurers mention Rosarda's worsening reputation, especially after the Chancellor's poisoning, which marked the decline. Esther learns the dark truth behind the turmoil. The kingdom's chaos traces back to the king, impregnating the Chancellor's daughter, which resulted in Zinc's birth. Shock spreads through the room as everyone realizes the scandal that tied Zinc to the royal family and set the stage for the conflict. Esther hears a shocking revelation about Zinc's origins, causing chaos in the room. One of the adventurers is scolded for carelessly revealing the truth, while another tries to calm the situation. Esther, overwhelmed, realizes that he and his brother may not even be related by blood. Urza gathers herself and begins to explain the truth. She reveals that the current king of Rosarta only secured his throne thanks to the support of the Chancellor. However, this alliance is bound by a terrible secret: the hidden circumstances surrounding Zinc's birth. The king, intoxicated by power, forced himself on the Chancellor's daughter, leading to scandalous consequences. Such an act risked his reputation, especially since he was betrothed to a foreign princess. Hiding the incident was nearly impossible, as the victim belonged to Rosarda's own Chancellor's family, making suppression of the rumors dangerous and difficult. The young lady, carrying Zinc, had been engaged to Gordon of House Nonrand, loyal to the crown. However, the former head of the Nonrand family opposed the union, as it would pass the family's name to a child not of his own blood. This opposition led to deeper conflicts, with political and personal motives intertwining. The previous head of House Nonrand plotted against the Chancellor's family. During a gathering hosted by them, he poisoned the food and wine with a slow-acting toxin. Many were targeted, but Zinc was spared because he stayed home to train his spear skills with Urza. Noble Sama and Gordon Sama were also absent that day, which saved their lives. Urza revealed that during a party held by the Chancellor's family, Noble Sama poisoned the food and wine, killing the young lady and her relatives. Only a few survived, including Urza, her husband, and son. Fearing exposure, Noble Sama and Gordon Sama threatened her into silence, leaving her powerless to stop Zinc's exile. Esther listens to Urza's painful confession about her powerlessness to prevent Zinc's exile. Though she blames herself, Esther reassures her it wasn't her fault. Still, he realizes that despite his brother's great powers, the nobles only see him as someone to be eliminated. The adventurers explained that while Esther and the others were confined, the capital had erupted with criticism against the royals. The crown prince had revealed the truth about Zinc's birth during an emergency meeting, throwing the palace into chaos. Esther was surprised by how much they knew, but they revealed they had bribed lower nobles for information, who eagerly traded secrets. The adventurers explained the kingdom's situation. The royal family faced heavy criticism, the palace was in disarray, and secrets about Zinc's birth had been exposed. Rumors spread freely, even trivial ones, showing the nobles' loss of dignity. One of the warriors declared the kingdom a sinking ship and revealed plans to move the dragon tears to Quol, inviting Esther to come along. Esther, filled with resentment, realized the rotten house and kingdom would never keep him. Esther, shaken by the kingdom's chaos and the truth about his brother, makes a bold request to the adventurers of Sacred Flame. He asks their leader, Karen, to take him as her slave. The group is stunned. Karen reacts with excitement, while the others are caught off guard by Esther's sudden and desperate plea. Urza explains that the royal family and House Nonrand are tied by a dark secret. The current king took the throne with the Chancellor's support, but forced himself on the Chancellor's daughter, leading to Zinc's birth. To protect his reputation, the king tried to cover up the scandal, but rumors persisted. Urza reveals that she intends to atone for her family's sins by offering herself as a slave, hoping one day to repay Zinc. Both she and Esther are determined to join under Sacred Flame, bound by guilt and loyalty to Zinc. The household prepared to flee across the border, sensing their downfall. Amid the chaos, one plotted to steal valuables, while Esther was pressured into servitude under the guise of loyalty, further highlighting the family's collapse. Esther is shocked when one of the adventurers is suddenly forced into a maid outfit, embarrassed and demanding to know why. The others watch in amusement, laughing at the scene. Esther is forced to disguise himself by cross-dressing, to avoid being recognized outside the gates. Though embarrassed, Urza praises his appearance, while the adventurers joke about how natural he looks. Esther, however, hides his face in shame, determined not to let his brother see him like this. The group sets out in a wagon pulled by powerful hippogriffs, charging ahead without rest. Karen uses her healing magic to keep the creatures running at full strength, impressing everyone with her skill. The Sacred Flame members explain that this wagon is the pride of their guild. Meanwhile, Esther quietly thinks of his brother, holding on to the hope of seeing him again. Esther reflects under the night sky, realizing that the bond with his brother is broken. From now on, he can only see him as Zinc-sama, not as family anymore. The group finally arrives at Gamma, known as the Labyrinth City or Adventurer City, a bustling hub filled with adventurers. The streets are crowded with people, and the lively atmosphere impresses them. The companions, amazed by the sight, realize they've reached a city brimming with opportunities and challenges. The group finally arrives at the Labyrinth City of Gamma, a bustling hub filled with adventurers. Known as Adventurer City, it thrives with energy and commerce around the massive maze. The city was founded when people gathered to hunt monsters, and its entrance, once just a giant hole, has now become an ancient towering structure. Despite its dangers, most people here are welcoming, making it a safer place than most cities. Ian explains that his family once had a branch store in Gamma, serving mostly adventurers from medium-sized clans. He describes how clans form. Small ones begin when a few parties group together, while large clans can grow to hundreds of parties. The group learns more about how clans in the city operate. Ian explains that clans provide many advantages, such as outposts for rest and help in filling party roles, but also reveals their darker side. Some clans use members as disposable shields in the maze, and as a merchant, he has seen shady dealings with them before. Esther realizes that he'll eventually have to face these kinds of people. They decide the best course of action is to head to the guild and start gathering information. The group finally arrives at Gamma's guild office, a massive building that highlights the city's reputation as the hub for adventurers. Compared to the smaller guilds they'd seen before, its size and grandeur show why Gamma is called the City of Adventurers. The group arrived at Gamma's guild, impressed by its size compared to Corda's. Known as the City of Adventurers, the guild bustled with activity. Inside, Esther compared the lively hall to a food court, noting the difference in its customers. At the counter, he clarified he wasn't posting a quest, but was there as an adventurer, surprising the receptionist. A drunk adventurer mocked Esther's small group, warning they wouldn't survive without protection. The guild clerk scolded him for disturbing work, while Esther calmly handed over his guild card to continue the process, ignoring the interruption. In the guild hall, Ian presents his card, shocking everyone as it reveals his S-rank status. The staff quickly directs him to a private office, while adventurers around react with disbelief. Some recognize his unique skills as the reason for his rank and begin discussing inviting him into their clan. The group arrived at a private room in the guild, where the atmosphere was much more refined than the lower floors. Some marveled at the comfort, relaxing on the sofas, while others reflected on the honor of being in the presence of Zinc. Despite the casualness of a few, the weight of respect for him lingered strongly in the room. Mona, a guild attendant, introduced herself as Zinc's personal contact. She explained that high-ranking adventurers like him receive exclusive services and offered her assistance whenever needed. Zinc realized this privilege was the reason for the jealousy from others. They agreed to drop formalities, knowing they would be seeing each other often. The group discusses the nature of the Gamma Labyrinth. It is known for producing endless monsters that respawn even after being completely destroyed. This makes the maze a dangerous place that constantly challenges adventurers. The labyrinth was explained to be an endless, dangerous maze. Monsters endlessly respawn after death, even if completely destroyed, and the deeper one goes, the stronger they become. Treasure chests with weapons or magic items can be found, but extreme environments such as harsh temperatures and humidity make survival difficult. Despite exploration, no one has ever reached its end, and records suggest its structure is vastly different from the surface. Zinc and his group received guidance from the guild. They were advised to prepare properly for the maze, especially by bringing sturdy shoes in multiple pairs, and since unstable footing during combat could be fatal. The guild also offered a wide range of supplies for adventurers. Afterward, the guild made a direct request to Zinc, signaling something more important than just preparations. Esther learns that the guild's request is for him to gather monster cores. Due to the ongoing war, Quoll's supply has run dangerously low since the previous year, and few adventurers are capable of venturing out to farm them. The group learns about the importance of monster cores, which serve as a vital resource much like electricity, powering everyday life with mana, for things such as water supply and fire. Low-rank adventurers struggle to survive, while high ranks focus on rarer loot, leaving few to farm cores. Since they are still novices, the group decides their best option is to hunt slimes, as they reliably drop cores. With determination, they set off to begin their task. The group ventures into the maze, noting that enchantments alone aren't enough to survive without real combat skills. They find a quiet spot, preparing to train and adapt to the environment. A slime appears, signaling the start of their practice. The adventurers enter the labyrinth and are attacked by multiple slimes. The group quickly organizes. Ian uses his sword and wind magic, while Nina takes the flank. The protagonist cuts through the middle, providing healing support, and tells the others to stay calm and treat the fight as training. The group is attacked by slimes. Esther quickly reacts, casting a water arrow to strike them back. Nina follows up, using her shield and sword to finish off the weakened slime. The attack lands, splashing the creature apart. Nina faces the slime with determination, following Esther's instructions. He tells her to stay alert and slice them apart to stop their movement. Focused, she slashes the slime with precision, cutting it down as Esther observes her progress. Ian draws his sword and launches himself into the fray, slashing through the slimes with precision and force. Surrounded, he cuts them down one after another, his movements sharp and relentless, holding his ground against the overwhelming numbers. Ian unleashed his full strength against the swarm of slimes. With swift sword strikes, he cut through their gelatinous bodies, then followed up by channeling powerful wind magic that blasted them apart. The slimes were shredded and scattered, overwhelmed by his relentless assault. The group fights fiercely against the slimes. Under Zinc's lead, Ian and Nina coordinate their attacks, cutting through the monsters with precision. Nina grows more confident, while Ian combines sword strikes with magic. Together, they wipe out a large wave of enemies. As the slimes fall, glowing monster cores scatter across the ground, proof of their progress. The group successfully defeats the slimes, watching them vanish and leave cores behind. Nina is amazed it worked, just as explained, while Ian notices his body feels lighter and that fatigue is minimal. They wonder if it's due to the enchantments, but Zinc hints there's more behind it. Ian explains that XP is like life force absorbed from defeated monsters. During the fight, Zinc had been monitoring their stats and confirms that Nina gained XP with each slime. Ian is at level 27, close to leveling up, while Nina reached level 16. Zinc notes how much faster they're progressing compared to training at home, proving that combat is the best way to grow. Excited, Nina declares she wants to keep leveling, now more confident after overcoming her initial fear. The group studies the dungeon map and learns about monster rooms, special chambers packed with enemies that must be cleared before leaving. They decide to target the slime room on the 3rd floor, which requires at least B-rank magic users to enter. With enough potions and healing spells prepared, they set their sights on the challenge ahead. The group finally reached the 3rd floor, entering the slime room. Zinc reminded them to rely on enchantments, but warned against overexertion. Ian and Nina acknowledged, readying themselves. As the heavy doors opened, they stepped inside, unsure if they were the first ones to arrive, only to find the room already crawling with slimes. The group advances into the slime room but is quickly overwhelmed. A massive horde of slimes pours out, far more than they expected. Their speed and numbers take everyone by surprise. Zinc realizes the danger while Ian could manage. Nina would not last against the swarm. He urgently commands them both to fall back as the overwhelming wave closes in. Zinc unleashes a powerful spell, summoning a massive water cyclone that engulfs and sweeps away the slimes around them. The overwhelming force clears the battlefield in an instant, displaying his immense magical strength. The group manages to defeat all the slimes at once with Zinc's overwhelming magic. The others are shocked at the display of power, realizing how dangerous the dungeon really is. Zinc reflects that he shouldn't have lowered his guard in such a high-level dungeon. After using all his mana for a powerful spell, the protagonist takes a break to rehydrate. Meanwhile, the group gets ready to gather slime cores and jellies before more monsters appear. Everyone agrees to work together and collect the loot. Nina feels guilty about wanting to fight, but the group reassures her and reflects on their own mistakes. They notice that just being near the person who defeats an enemy is enough to gain experience. The party agrees to be more cautious and considers warning the guild about the dangers in the area. Even for strong sorcerers, things aren't entirely safe. The three continue working together. The group spends the entire night farming slimes for experience, not caring about the attention they get. Their main goal is to help Nina improve, and she even picks up some shielding skills in the process. Still, they realize the slimes aren't giving enough experience, but Nina proves to be pretty intense about battling. Now stronger, the group considers heading to deeper dungeon floors. They learn about a goblin room, but decide to skip it, because Nina has bad memories of goblins from her old village, and the others agree since the rewards aren't worth it. Instead, they plan to target kobolds or orcs on other floors. The group decides to hunt kobolds next since their drops are more valuable than goblins, and orcs would just ruin their weapons. Nina is excited to fight stronger monsters and camp out, feeling like a real adventurer. They get ready to set up camp on the kobold floor. The group spots the kobold respawn point marked by a magic circle across the room. As kobolds appear, they quickly make a plan. Ian leads the charge, Nina supports from behind, and everyone stays alert for kobolds trying to flank them. If anyone gets tired, they'll switch positions and rely on magic attacks from the backline. The kobolds rush at the group, and the battle kicks off. Ian takes the lead, attacking with his sword and casting magic. He uses a wind arrow spell to take down one of the kobolds quickly, keeping the momentum as the fight begins. Nina jumps into the fight, blocking a kobold's sword strike with her shield while holding her ground. She faces the kobold head-on, showing the skills she's picked up in training. Nina defends against the kobold's attack and quickly counters, striking back with force. She lands a solid hit, showing she's grown more confident and skilled in battle. As the kobolds start to close in, the protagonist quickly casts a water wall spell to shield the team. Ian and Nina regroup inside the barrier, getting ready for the next wave of attacks. The kobolds can't break through the magic barrier, giving the group a safe moment. Since it's the first time using this spell in combat, they're a bit surprised by how effective it is. With the enemies held back, the team decides to take a breather and collect the loot left on the ground. With the water wall about to drop, the group gets ready to clear out the remaining kobolds. Ian suggests they all attack using magic instead of moving around so much. He proposes giving Nina an enchanted weapon since she can't use spells, hoping it will let her join in the magical attacks. The group decides to invest in an enchanted weapon for Nina, letting her use magic even with her low mana. She's thrilled about it and can finally cast spells with the help of potions. For now, she's only able to use Water Ball, but it's a big step toward becoming a magical girl like she always wanted. The kobolds charge at the group in large numbers. Ian and Zinc unleash their magic attacks, blasting through the enemies and holding the line as the fight intensifies. Nina excitedly unleashes a flurry of water ball spells at the kobolds, enjoying her new magical power. She gets so into it that Zinc has to remind her to pace herself, but she just gulps down a potion and keeps going. Eager to keep using magic, the group pauses to gather loot and take a break. Nina, after chugging too many potions to keep casting spells, ends up needing to rush to the bathroom, embarrassed by the situation. The others can't help but laugh a little at her expense. To help Nina with her urgent situation, Zinc hands her a box, enchanted as a magic bag for privacy. Though embarrassed, Nina reluctantly uses it while the group promises not to look, making the whole moment awkward but a bit funny for everyone. Nina, embarrassed, demands that no one look while she uses the magic bag, threatening to end their friendship if anyone peeks. The group continues their adventure, and by the third day they reach the 15th floor, where they face off against a fierce new monster. The group manages to defeat a large monster on the 15th floor. They stay cautious, knowing more threats could appear. But Zinc is confident that as long as they face enemies one at a time, they can handle whatever comes next. After defeating the orcs, Ian feels more confident, having overcome his fear. Nina is excited to cook the orc meat at their camp, treating monsters as just more ingredients. The group reflects on how quickly they're leveling up in the maze, understanding why so many adventurers come here. Their skills and stats have noticeably improved. After 3 days in the dungeon, the group prepares to tackle the boss room next, a fight against an Orc General. They decide that Ian and Zinc will lead the charge and use their spells, while Nina supports them from the backline. Once this battle is over, they plan to head back to the surface. The group enters the boss room and faces the massive Orc General, who's ready for battle. Without hesitation, they charge in to start the fight. The team launches their attack on the Orc General, landing some hits, but also struggling as the boss fights back hard. Ian takes the lead, using both his sword and magic, but the orc's strength keeps everyone on their toes. The fight quickly turns intense, pushing the group to stay sharp and work together. Ian finishes off the Orc General with a decisive blow. The group celebrates their victory, with Nina excited about the orc meat they've just earned as loot. They're proud of how far they've come as a team. While checking the loot, Nina finds a strange, round, jiggly item that smells odd. Zinc and Ian quickly realize it's actually an orc's testicle, not just meat, and stop Nina before she can do anything weird with it. The moment turns a bit awkward, but funny for the group. Back at camp, Nina prepares her specialty orc meat soup, but the group ends up not being able to eat it. While they talk about the unusual orc loot, a new character is drawn in by the smell of the food and approaches them, hinting at a new encounter. The new character introduces himself as Luke, the master of the Elder Tree clan and an S-rank archer. Zinc realizes Luke is also S-rank and notes he's finally meeting the famous enchanter he's heard about. The group seems intrigued by this strong new ally. Zinc and the group size up Luke, noting he doesn't have any rare skills but must be skilled to reach S-rank, especially with such high archery stats. They're cautious, knowing his clan is powerful and influential. As they wonder about his intentions, Luke hints he actually has a favor to ask, just as a crowd forms around their camp for food. Luke and his group, low on supplies after battling monsters, approach Zinc's party and ask for food, admitting they might not make it back to the surface without help. Realizing the request is genuine, Zinc considers using this situation to their advantage, especially since Luke's group is even willing to pay for the food. Zinc decides not to take money from Luke and his group. Instead, he asks for information about the clans in exchange for food. Luke agrees, as long as it's nothing too sensitive. The group gets ready to share their orc meat meal, sealing the deal over dinner. Everyone enjoys Nina's cooking, amazed at the taste after surviving on bland food for so long. The atmosphere turns lively, with some calling her a goddess for her food. Meanwhile, Luke prepares to share the clan information Zinc requested, grateful for the feast and the supplies the group brought. Luke explains there are two major clans in the game, the Depths of Purgatory and the Emissaries. Although some people include Elder Tree as part of a Big Three, Elder Tree is actually much smaller compared to the other two clans. Luke explains that the two main clans enforce strict hierarchy, pushing weaker members to the bottom and using them as expendable fighters in the maze. Membership fees are high, and leaving a clan is seen as betrayal, making it hard to join other guilds. In contrast, Elder Tree values freedom, attracting people who want to avoid those harsh rules. The group discusses how the two big clans have a bad reputation, even among merchants. Some people fall into debt or get hurt, ending up worse off after leaving. Zinc says he'd like to help guild leavers, but knows it would cause problems with the major clans. Despite the trouble, the clan's names still carry weight, and many people join without knowing the risks. With their meal done, they agree to head back to the surface together, feeling grateful for the valuable info Luke shared. The group finally makes it back to the surface after days underground. Stepping into the sunlight, they feel relieved and happy to see the sun again. Luke thanks the group for the meal and hopes they'll meet again. Before leaving, he warns them that the two major clans have taken an interest in them, urging them to be careful. Zinc and the others say their goodbyes, acknowledging the warning. After their first maze run, the group is happy they've gotten stronger and earned a lot more than hunting outside. Ian suggests Zinc could even start his own clan if he brings in more people. Zinc feels a bit uneasy, sensing trouble ahead, but decides to focus on gathering influence. He then reminds the group he needs to return for exams, so the others can take a break for now. The next day, Zinc delivers a massive haul of loot, 3 days' worth, to the Adventurers Guild, surprising the staff with the sheer amount. He offers to gather even more if needed, leaving the guild worker overwhelmed by the huge number of items to count. The guild worker gets excited after finding an Orc General testicle in the loot, explaining it's rare because adventurers usually sell them right away. Zinc is a bit confused by her reaction, but learns that these testicles fetch a high price as an aphrodisiac ingredient, though he personally prefers the meat. Dan, the guildmaster, returns and comments that a young lady shouldn't be swinging testicles around. The woman is surprised to see him back. Dan says he came to check out the new S-rank adventurer for himself. His title, the Butcher, is revealed, and everyone seems to recognize his reputation. Dan, the guildmaster, tells the protagonist that since he cleared a boss room in 3 days, he can now take his provisional B-rank exam. The exam is a test of endurance. He has to withstand Dan's attacks for an hour. Dan will be his opponent, wanting to see how well the protagonist can handle himself after rising quickly through the ranks. The group talks about the fairness of the provisional exam since it mainly tests defense, not offense. Zinc thinks it's a bit unfair for those who specialize in attack. Dan, the guildmaster, tells Zinc not to get cocky and warns he's not going to pull any punches. No matter if Zinc is S-rank or highborn, he's still in for a tough time if he underestimates the test. Dan mocks Zinc, calling him a pipsqueak with a fancy skill, and says he won't know what hit him. Zinc keeps calm, promising not to get cocky but jokes back, threatening to pull out Dan's remaining hair and says he'll use all his enchantment. Mona, watching the mountain of monster cores, says she has an idea, and the exam is set to start as soon as the preparations are done. Zinc loads himself with enchanted gear, chugging a mana potion and stacking every athletics buff he has, plus 52 for almost every piece of equipment, even underwear. His total athletics enchantments add up to plus 832. He thinks maybe he went overboard, but also feels Dan had it coming. Zinc gets ready for his exam. The rules are simple. He can use defensive spells, his sword, or whatever he wants, but he fails if he attacks Dan in any way. The test continues until the sand in the hourglass runs out. The match begins as Dan signals the start. Zinc and Dan clash several times, both blocking and trading blows without going overboard. The fight is intense, but neither crosses the line. As the hourglass runs out, the examiner calls time. Both are surprised at each other's endurance and skill. Dan is exhausted and admits the fight was even tougher than he expected, realizing Zinc never even broke a sweat. Zinc mentions how Dan's attacks were relentless, always targeting joints and tendons, making it feel like he was being butchered alive. Dan admits that's just his style, since if the opponent can't move, The fight is as good as over. Zinc then points out that's why Dan is called the Butcher. But Dan says Zinc is pretty scary too. Zinc reveals that during the fight, he was pretending to parry, but was actually aiming to damage Dan's blade by hitting the same spot repeatedly. Dan realizes that if the match had continued, his sword would have broken. He's surprised, admits he couldn't even notice Zinc's tactic, and acknowledges defeat, saying Zinc passes the exam. Dan admits he was trying to mess with Zinc's head during the fight, but it backfired. He then asks Zinc to come to the library later because they need to talk. Meanwhile, Dan thinks about how his sword is one of a kind. Dan is exhausted, and someone comments that the job was supposed to be safe and easy. Mona congratulates Zinc on making provisional B rank. She tells him that, with all his loot 57,234 cores, 4,193 kobold knives, and a bunch of orc materials he earned, 108 gold, 87 silver, and 138 copper pieces. The guild staff is overwhelmed by how many cores they had to count, while Zinc realizes Mona made the others do the counting work for her. They're sitting in a lounge having a talk. Mona says at provisional B rank, an escort is no longer mandatory on safe roads, but she still recommends prioritizing safety. Dan says Zinc can handle himself. He proved it back in Korta. Zinc asks Dan what he wanted to discuss. Dan brings up the idea of getting contractors for transport and trade, and Zinc says he was planning to do that eventually, asking why Dan brought it up. Dan explains that they arrested the kid who picked a fight with Zinc before Ian's little brother, but he's already been released. The boy's father, a merchant with guild ties, still came to Gamel to make things right. Dan suggests Zinc hear him out and maybe make a deal. Dan also warns that because of Zinc, a lot of merchants, not all with good intentions, will start coming to the city, and Zinc wonders how that benefits the guild. Dan says the merchant is desperate. His eldest son became a slave, and his only other son is now in trouble. Dan points out it's better for the guild if Zinc sells through a trusted merchant, hinting that Zinc could help someone who's at the end of his rope. Zinc thinks to himself that maybe the merchant isn't just a rude old guy after all. Zinc agrees to meet the merchant to settle things, and Ian insists on coming along. They arrive at the meeting, where the merchant chief Yorkie Lawrence greets them, and Ian prepares himself for a difficult conversation. Everyone gathers for the meeting. With Ian's help, Zinc quickly settles things with Yorkie, who apologizes and agrees to discipline his son and make a business contract. Ian is told to spend time with his father after everything is resolved. Zinc returns home and is greeted by the servants Angie and Momiza. They let him know Ian is spending time with his family, and Angie gives Zinc a letter that arrived in the mail. Zinc gets a letter from Chris, asking him to visit the Brand estate. The letter mentions that two slaves, Esther and Urza, want to see him, which surprises Zinc a lot. Chris gives Zinc a letter, and after reading it, Zinc finds out there are two slaves named Esther and Urza who want to meet him. Chris reveals that Zinc is actually a prince, the illegitimate child of the king of Rosarda, not the eldest son of House Nonland. Esther and Urza left the country to avoid more trouble, and now the royal family and the country are in chaos. Will, Karen, and Bogart arrive, and Zinc rushes to see the girls. He finds Esther and Urza looking worn out, but they're finally reunited. Zinc finds Esther and Urza in poor condition and demands to know who is responsible. He learns from the others that the girls themselves chose this harsh treatment as a way to atone for their actions, and as an apology to Zinc. The group starts to explain the situation in more detail. Zinc meets Esther and Urza, who became slaves as a form of atonement for the events that led to his exile. After learning the truth from Will, he tells them he doesn't want to punish them. Esther and Urza apologize for what happened, and for not being able to protect him. Zinc says he's just glad they're okay. Zinc finally meets Esther and Urza, who are being held in poor conditions as a form of atonement for their past actions. He learns from Will about the reason for his exile, and why the two chose to become slaves. Esther and Urza apologize, but Zinc refuses to blame them, making it clear they're family no matter what. Emotions run high, and the group witnesses their reunion, realizing how strong their bond is. Zinc is entrusted with Esther and Urza's care until Esther becomes an adult. The others thank him and leave, with Zinc offering more enchanted items in return. For now, Esther stays a slave only on paper for her own protection, since Zinc's status keeps others from harming her. He admits he'd free them if he could, but it's safer to wait until things settle down in Rosarda. Esther and Urza insist on staying as Zinc's slaves, even saying they want to serve him for life, but he's frustrated by their stubbornness. Meanwhile, Zinc realizes his title has even changed to King Rosarda's illegitimate child. Elsewhere, a character recognizes Zinc's background, and Will shares that Rosarda's royal family has collapsed, the queen filed for divorce, and the country's alliances have dissolved, leaving the throne empty. A man is dragged to the guillotine while yelling for release, insisting there's been a mistake and asking if anyone knows who he is. The crowd watches, and an executioner prepares the device. Meanwhile, it's said that war is likely to break out soon in Rosarda. The man is executed by guillotine while shouting about being the head of a once great house. After this, the scene shifts to the underground prison in the royal capital of Tar, where someone is being forced inside. A prisoner is locked up and warned not to cause trouble. Meanwhile, the king is furious about being forced to stay in a villa by the nobles and demands news, feeling humiliated by his situation. The king greets his father, acting confident, but is suddenly hit hard by the older man after trying to ask about the situation. The king is beaten and insulted by his own father, who blames him for everything that happened, calling him a disgrace and saying he doesn't need a son like him. The king, after being struck down by his father, realizes he is dying and thinks it's absurd to meet his end this way. As he loses consciousness, his final thoughts are full of resentment and blame towards Zinc, believing everything happened because of him. A wave of rage and murderous intent spreads through the city, echoing the dying king's grudge. The atmosphere turns dangerous, and the king's final intense hatred is focused completely on Zinc, swearing to kill him. Zinc didn't expect his return to Quallart to go like this. Since he was there, he took his exams at the academy, added a new member to his group, and after 2 weeks in the capital, he headed back to Gamel. Esther meets Ian and Nina, determined to keep up with them. They welcome him, and the group gets along as they prepare to work together. Esther chooses to wear the armor given by his brother, even though the enchantments are basic. The group agrees to support him during their next maze run, keeping his current abilities in mind. Esther, now level 23, is set to spam the orc room with the group for 3 days to get stronger. After that, he'll be able to join the others in attacking the next floor. He assures everyone he's experienced with fighting monsters, so there's no need to worry. Esther ended up having to fight in a maid outfit because of Karen's orders. After that, the group decides to focus on leveling up Esther's magic and mana, since he has talent for wind magic, along with his spear skills. Before the group leaves for Gamel, Nina teases that she'll bully Esther as his senpai and make him go through some embarrassing moments. The maids promise to take care of the house while everyone is away. Zinc asks the maids to avoid leaving the house if they don't need to, since he's gained a reputation. Angie and Mimosa confidently say they'll use their enchanted weapons to protect themselves if needed. Esther introduces himself to Mona, who realizes he's Zinc's younger brother. After some quick greetings, Zinc asks Mona if anything changed while he was gone. Mona hints that something did happen. Mona brings up the topic of named monsters and asks if Zinc knows about them. He says he's heard of them. Mona explains that named monsters are rare cases where the souls of the dead possess monsters, giving them intelligence, memories, and sometimes the ability to speak. These monsters even have their appearance influenced by the soul inside. Zinc is shocked, but Mona confirms that it's true. The Orc General on the 15th floor, which they cleared before, has turned into a named monster. The Orc General, now a named monster, stands ready to fight, filled with rage and focused on Zinc as his target. Zinc and his group realize that the Orc General in the boss room has become a named monster, now with human-like intelligence. They understand this will make the fight much harder to clear. Zinc is surprised to find out that the named Orc General is actually weaker than before. Its attack patterns became even simpler, especially after gaining a soul from someone troubled in their past life. The monster now charges at women without thinking, making it easy for even low-level parties to clear the room by using female adventurers as bait. After the 15th floor became easier to clear, long lines started forming before floor 16. Weaker adventurers take too long and cause congestion, which leads to more accidents and arguments in the maze. The adventurers now call the boss Dork as a joke. Zinc is asked to help any adventurers who really need it. Zinc says he doesn't mind helping if it's not too much trouble. With his enchantments, he can let his whole party heal. He then heads to the 15th floor and easily defeats enemies using an air slicer attack. Esther defeats the monsters with magic and sword attacks, showing he's gotten stronger and more efficient. Ian and the others notice his improvement, and Esther thanks Ian for his help. Esther feels like he's getting stronger, and Ian points out his improvement. Nina wants to tease him, but remembers Esther's rough past. The group gets ready to move on. Esther has leveled up a lot over 3 days, going from level 23 to 57. The group gets ready for the next floor and plans to take down the Orc General, making sure to keep Nina in the back since the Orc General is known to be a bit of a pervert. The group enters the boss room and the magic circle activates. The Orc General appears, immediately recognizing Zinc and screaming his name, focused on wanting to kill him. The team is caught off guard that the monster knows Zinc's name. The orc keeps repeating kill as it faces them. Zinc quickly realizes that the Orc General is actually possessed by Elliot, the Crown Prince. The others are surprised to hear this, and Ian confirms that Elliot is an acquaintance of Zinc, but a rotten one. The Orc General is now known as the Dork, and his stats are shown. Zinc faces the Orc General, thinking it must be fate. He decides to handle it himself, gathering his magic and unleashing a fireball attack right at the orc. The fireball barely affects the Orc General, who looks annoyed but not hurt. Zinc admits he just learned fire magic and wanted to try it out, but the spell was really weak. The Orc General suddenly starts shouting, "Woman!" and seems to lose focus on Zinc. The orc starts trembling and looks desperate, just repeating "woman" over and over, while Zinc is confused by the reaction. Zinc takes advantage of the orc's distraction and lands a strong attack, stabbing the Orc General, Elliot, while telling him to focus on him. The orc screams in pain, caught off guard by Zinc's move. Zinc calls out the orc, making himself the target. The orc roars his name and charges. Zinc gets ready, then lands a direct hit on the Orc General, attacking him head-on. Zinc goes all in and delivers a clean, powerful slash right down the middle of the Orc General. The orc is split and collapses, leaving everyone around shocked by how fast it ended. The group stands near the defeated Orc General. Zinc notes he never expected to see that enemy again. Nina points out a Shiriko Dama, a slime-like item, that dropped, and Zinc explains it's a symbol of the orc's appetite from his past life. Ian mentions he heard from Mona that these testicles have been dropping more often since Elliot became the boss, and honestly, he just wants to leave it behind. Zinc explains that after being dethroned and executed, Elliot's soul, filled with strong resentment, possessed a monster in the maze. Now, his soul is trapped there forever, forced to respawn endlessly, getting killed by adventurers over and over for XP and items. Zinc just thinks it serves Elliot right for holding such a grudge. The group clears the boss room and heads to the 20th floor, known as the Crystal Area. It's a busy and popular spot in the dungeon, full of adventurers. Zinc finds the place damp and uncomfortable, but Esther is excited to arrive. The group learns that you can find emeralds and diamonds in this area, which explains why it's crowded. Nina and Esther get excited to try mining, and Zinc wants to make some money. He warns them that mining uses a lot of stamina and tells them not to overdo it, handing out some pickaxes. Ian then asks to talk to Esther privately. Ian uses his material appraisal skill to spot minerals, saying the crystals in a certain area should have plenty of emeralds. Zinc is impressed he used appraisal for this, and Nina is excited to start digging. They all get to mining in the spot Ian suggested. The group is excited as they dig up a bunch of emeralds, with Nina showing off her find. While the kids are enjoying the mining, Zinc decides to try something else with the leftover rocks. Ian is also pleased, thinking about how he can use the mine tailings, enjoying the process in his own way. Zinc impresses everyone by creating a golem using earth magic. He explains that he's been practicing, but keeping the golem moving uses up a lot of mana, so he can't do it for long. He hints that the golem can do more than just mining. Zinc explains that the guild warned them about traps and pitfalls on the lower floors, so the golem can be used to trigger and clear traps for the party. For now, he mainly uses the golem to make mining faster, but he mentions they can use it for lots of other things too. The group agrees it's a useful tool. There's a noisy argument happening between two clans over mining spots each side, claiming the area as their turf. Zinc calls it immature and decides they should just finish up mining and leave before getting involved. The mood shifts from a fun treasure hunt to wanting to avoid unnecessary trouble. The group reaches floor 21 and finds themselves in the grassland area. Even though they're still inside the maze, it feels like they're outside because it's always daylight here. Everyone is a bit confused, noting that the maze gets weirder with each floor. In this area, there are creatures called green calves that taste really good apparently, even better than orc meat. One of them has tried it before, but only once, since it's hard to find and expensive in big cities. The group considers hunting some since they're feeling hungry, but they remember Mona, Sans warning that casualties in the maze are increasing. Even so, they decide they'll be fine. The group decides to go hunt for some calf meat, but suddenly giant insect-like monsters appear, tearing apart a body and eating it. It's clear the area is way more dangerous than it looked at first. They manage to hunt a green calf for dinner. Everyone takes turns helping, and by the end they have enough meat to eat and even some extra to sell to the guild. The group enjoys their meal and is impressed by how tasty the green calf meat is. They talk about other local creatures like white cows and minotaurs, mentioning that the milk and meat from white cows are also really good. This area of the maze has a lot of bovine monsters. Esther is happy because his wind magic just leveled up, and now he can use a new move he's been practicing, though it's got a shorter range. The group also talks about minotaurs. Their meat is terrible and only good for crafting, and their great axe is way too heavy to use. They get ready to move on. A wounded group stumbles out of the grass, clearly exhausted and beat up. Esther's party asks if they're okay, but one of the survivors just says they should hurry and get out too. When asked what happened, he only says one word: ants. The group learns there's a huge ant nest in the area. The injured adventurers explain they ran into a swarm and only a few of them made it out alive. The others likely didn't make it. Esther offers to heal the survivors if they share more info about the ants, since he's never fought them before. The injured adventurers explain that the ants attack with their claws, spit acid, and have thick shells, but they're weak to fire. The problem is, there are just too many ants. Esther realizes it's a bad matchup since he mostly uses water magic, and Ian uses wind. Plus, Esther only just learned fire magic. The rescued adventurers warn that, to get through floor 24, you need a lot of sorcerers, usually only clans can do it, since the ants defend their queen fiercely. They thank Zinc's group for saving them and advise to avoid fighting the ants if possible. Zinc decides they'll push forward to floor 24, but will be cautious. The group explores floor 24, noticing the area is larger due to an ant nest beneath. While they observe the grazing cows, a sudden rumble startles everyone. The animals run off, and the group senses an earthquake. They look around, realizing something is approaching from the distance. The group is suddenly chased by a huge swarm of ants and tries to escape. One of them gets surrounded and attacked, but manages to fight back using magic, hitting several ants at once. One of the girls gets attacked and injured by the ants, while the others try to protect her. The group realizes the number of ants is overwhelming. There are thousands of them, making the situation way more dangerous. The group faces a tough choice: abandon the injured adventurers to escape or try to help. Ian suggests escaping is safer, but Zinc decides they should fight, knowing the kids would regret leaving people behind, especially Nina. He tells everyone to use their spells and potions to push back the ants. Zinc, feeling the weight of being the party leader, is determined to protect everyone and get them out alive. The group rushes into action, while Zinc warns the other adventurers to escape as well. Zinc and his group decide to hold off the swarm to give the other adventurers a chance to escape. He tells them to run if things get worse, and the rescued group thanks them before making a run for it. Zinc and Nina unleash their spells together, using water and wind magic to attack the swarm of ants that's coming at them. Zinc, Ian, and Nina fight back hard against the ant swarm, each using their own abilities and spells to hold the monsters back. Ian and Zinc keep blasting the ants with spells and drinking mana potions, but the endless waves are wearing out the kids. They're struggling without fire magic, so it's getting harder to keep up. Zinc throws up a water wall to protect Esther and Nina, giving them a moment to regroup and recover with potions. While the barrier holds off the ants, Zinc tries to quickly plan their next move. Zinc realizes their group will eventually be overwhelmed if they keep fighting like this. He thinks about going straight for the Ant Queen to make the swarm collapse, but she's far away and surrounded by commander ants that look stronger than the rest. Zinc decides to use orc meat as bait. He quickly stabs and flings the meat toward the ants, trying to draw them away. Zinc uses the bait and manages to lure some ants away. He quickly dashes forward, but one of the ants spits acid at him, forcing him to dodge. Zinc defeats the ant commander, making the other ants start to panic and turn on each other. He quickly notices that his plan to disrupt the swarm is working. Zinc gives out orders. Ian will use wind magic to scatter orc meat, and the group will attack the ant commanders with ranged spells when the swarm opens up. The team gets ready to act. Zinc tells Nina and Esther to cover for Ian and use magic to clear a path to the queen ant. The group agrees, ready to take down the queen if they can get close. Everyone gets into position for the push. Ian uses his wind magic to move the rocks, while Nina and Esther launch their spells to break through the ant swarm. The ants react to the attack as the group pushes forward. Ian cuts down the ants blocking their way, while Nina and Esther support with magic. The group keeps pushing through the enemies, determined to reach their goal. The group fights their way forward using magic and physical attacks, clearing out waves of ants. As the battle heats up, the Ant Queen appears ahead, signaling the next big challenge. The group faces off against the massive Ant Queen. The protagonist stands ready, while the queen looks menacing with her many limbs. He quickly analyzes her abilities, thinking her skills aren't that impressive, but still prepares for a tough fight. The atmosphere is tense as he plans how to take her down. The protagonist quickly attacks the Ant Queen, dodging her strikes and launching a fireball at her. The queen tries to counter, but he keeps pressing, staying on the move and pushing the fight forward. The protagonist dodges the queen ant's attacks and keeps up the pressure, but realizes it's hard to actually damage her. Since she's so big, her moves are predictable and easier to avoid, but finding a real opening to hurt her is a challenge. The protagonist remembers a past lesson and decides to keep moving quickly around the queen ant, targeting the joints in her legs. Since the queen is big and slow to turn, this gives him a clear strategy to wear her down by attacking her weak spots. Zinc keeps attacking the queen ant, but smaller ants start getting in the way. His group helps by using magic to clear the smaller ants and keep the path open for him to keep focusing on the queen. Zinc's group keeps holding off the ants, but everyone is starting to get tired and run low on mana and potions. Zinc realizes he needs to finish the fight soon, so he goes in for another attack on the queen ant. The protagonist faces off against the giant ant queen, dodging her attacks and trying to find a weak spot. He uses his speed to move around her, aiming for her joints and slowly wearing her down. With help from his allies, he manages to cut off her legs and finally brings her down, ending the fight and collapsing the swarm's organization. He finishes off the queen ant by slicing off her last leg and antennae, leaving her unable to fight back. With the queen completely weakened, the protagonist goes in for the final attack. With the queen ant defeated, the remaining ants start to flee. The group finally gets a break, realizing how close they were to not making it out alive, but relieved that everyone is safe. The group checks on each other after the fight, relieved that no one got seriously hurt. They realize they earned a lot of loot from the battle. With the queen ant being A-rank, there's a comment about a possible rank up. They start gathering the spoils, ready to leave the maze. After everything, the protagonist doubts if they're ready for more, thinking defeating just one A rank isn't much. A few days later at the guild, their reward ends up being a lecture about not risking their life as an enchanter. The guild learns about the party's fight with the ant swarm and that they rescued some B-rank adventurers. As a reward, they're offered 3 platinum pieces, an amount that's basically half an adventurer's total assets. The protagonist feels the reward is way too much. The guild explains that the big reward is fair, since saving the B-rank adventurers was risky. Zinc accepts the reward after hearing that without his help, the others wouldn't have survived. The guildmaster tells him not to risk his life like that again, and makes it clear she values him not just as an enchanter, but as someone important. Zinc is told by Mona that she was the one who asked him to help other adventurers, but now she feels she might have pushed too much and apologizes. Zinc reassures her, saying it was his own decision. Before leaving to call the guildmaster, Mona reminds Zinc that there are people who truly want him to live, and asks him not to forget that. After Mona leaves, the group talks about how she probably was just really worried about them. Soon after, a man arrives and scolds Zinc for risking his life and his friend's safety during the fight with the ants, calling it foolish to act so recklessly just to save someone else. Esther gets angry at the guildmaster for being harsh, but Zinc calms her down and admits he'll be more careful next time. The guildmaster decides to drop the lecture and mentions he has some important news to share. The guildmaster explains that some nobles from Rosarta snuck into the country disguised as merchants and tried to get an escort. Their true identity was discovered because one of them couldn't hide how he spoke. Now, they're being watched closely by adventurers loyal to the guild. They find out the Rosarta nobles want to bring him back to Rosarta and make him king, even after all the trouble to exile him. The guildmaster admits sharing this info is usually confidential, but since the nobles used fake identities, he decided to tell anyway. The guild decides to treat the situation as a personal matter, since they're neutral in international issues. The protagonist realizes he'll need to report everything to King Quiol. He also starts thinking about which nobles would want him as king, narrowing it down to someone loyal to the throne, but not the crown prince, someone bold enough to sneak across the border. He suddenly figures out who it is. Marcus Petainer, known for being elitist and harsh with commoners, is introduced as the new leader of the royalists after his father's execution. Right now, he's staying in the capital and doesn't know the protagonist is in Gamel. The protagonist considers warning allies and moving the maids to safety, worried about what might happen in the capital and the palace. A conflict between 2 factions forced the group Zinc save to take a detour, leading them to run into the ants. Zinc is asked if the situation caused any damage, but he explains there was no real harm, though their mining expedition had to end early to avoid more trouble. Zinc gives permission for a complaint to be filed against both clanmasters, since their actions have troubled many adventurers. The group thinks about how the 2 big clans, especially the Depths of Purgatory, must be a headache for the guild. The meeting wraps up. Dan San warns Zinc to lay low since things are starting to get complicated. The group is left with a sense that trouble is brewing in the city. Inside the emissary's clubhouse, the group is frustrated about getting a claim from the enchanter. Since it's coming from someone powerful, they know they can't just ignore it. They argue about who caused the trouble and complain that they can't do anything official until their leader returns. The group realizes their leader, Herbert, and the higher-ups are deep in the dungeon and can't help right now. They know Herbert will be furious when he hears the news, so they decide to warn everyone on the surface to lay low until things calm down. The Depths of Purgatory members meet to discuss the situation. They decide to keep watch for trouble from the emissaries until Herbert returns. They talk about how Zinc got involved after seeing a fight between their members and the emissary. Some are glad the adventurers are protecting their territory, but they're also cautious in case it leads to problems. The leader brings up Zinc, hinting at further discussion. The Depths of Purgatory leader reveals that the Kingdom of Nazar has ordered them to assassinate Zinc. The Depths of Purgatory is a big clan in Gamel, but most of their top members were sent to the Kingdom of Nazar for intelligence gathering. With Queen Melissa deciding it's not worth bringing Zinc to Nazar, the order is to assassinate him instead. It's pointed out that her son Elliot was the one who planned Zinc's exile. The leaders talk about how Zinc wants to stay in Qual and won't serve Nazar, making him a threat to their kingdom. The assassins know it's up to them to stop him. They mention how difficult it'll be to send someone after Zinc, since maze runners are hard to blend in, and failing the mission means death for them. They start discussing if there's anyone suitable for the job. One of the assassins steps up and volunteers for the mission, confident in his skills and determined to get it done. The others tell him to disguise himself as an emissary, cause chaos, and make sure Zinc believes the emissaries are responsible, even if he fails. He's told to stay vigilant and to cause as much trouble in Quol as possible. A few days after the Ant Swarm battle, everyone celebrates their level-ups. Zinc enchants items for the group, Ian's wind magic skill surpasses 100, and Nina turns 13, getting teased by Esther about being called Wani-san now. The mood is light, and everyone feels stronger after their recent fight. The group prepares for their next challenge, planning to rush past the floor filled with ants and reach the safe zone on floor 26. They hear from Mona-san that only experienced adventurers get through, as the area ahead is a frost zone and extremely cold. The team gets ready to find winter clothes, feeling a mix of curiosity and nervousness about what's coming next. This time, the group's main goal is to clear new dungeon floors, not to gather items or minerals. The protagonist uses memories from their past life in Japan to get an idea of how harsh the cold could be, since the world they're in doesn't have 4 seasons, just stable weather all year. The party heads out together, determined and focused on the new objective. The group reaches floor 26 and is immediately hit by a freezing wind. Everyone feels the cold much more than anything they experienced before, even compared to Japan. The protagonist tells everyone to use their athletic boosts and push straight to the boss room without breaks. To deal with the wind, he uses magic to put up an air curtain and keeps everyone together so they can stay warm and move quickly. The group keeps moving under the magical barrier, but they get ambushed by a pack of wolves. Ian uses his wind magic to slice through the enemies, while Zinc follows up with water magic to finish them off. Together, they quickly take down the attacking monsters and keep pushing forward. They struggle to hunt in the cold because everything freezes instantly, including Ian's water magic. Nina is curious about popsicles since there's no ice cream in this world. After a tough journey through the icy floors, the group finally reaches the boss room on floor 30, wondering how other adventurers even manage it. Before facing the boss, Zinc uses alchemy to create a metal golem from the leftover materials. The golem is strong and easily lifts heavy objects, surprising the group. Zinc tells the group he wants to try something, asking them to wait and see. As they move forward, they realize the next room is at a comfortable temperature, so they start taking off their winter gear. The scene hints at something big about to happen as the ground rumbles and something approaches. The group faces a huge dinosaur-like monster called Acrocanth, ranked A, with high stats in athletics and bite. Zinc quickly warns everyone that physical attacks won't work against its tough scales, so they need to dodge and use magic. He also stresses that if anyone gets caught by its bite, they're done for. The tension rises as the fight begins. Zinc dodges the Acrocanth's bite and starts chanting a spell. The monster keeps attacking, but the group stays focused. Ian casts Air Cyclone, a strong wind spell that takes some time to prepare but packs a punch, aiming it right at the monster. Zinc hits the Acrocanth with a powerful water tornado, and the monster goes down quickly. The group is surprised by how easy it was, figuring the monster didn't have any special skills. They talk about how Zinc's enchantments have made their magic much stronger, and even Zinc admits it almost feels unfair. If things got tough, they were ready to go all out with their strongest spells or aim for the monster's eyes. In the end, the fight is over fast, and the group is left feeling a bit surprised at their own strength. The group finally reaches the safe area and is relieved to take a break. Zinc realizes why people are always keeping an eye on him. Inside the safe zone, they see a bunch of rough-looking adventurers, most of them likely from the Emissaries and Purgatory clans. The atmosphere is tense, and everyone looks worn out. Zinc is recognized by Leon from the Elder Tree clan, who remembers Zinc for sharing orc stew with them before. Leon suggests they move away from the tense crowd of Emissaries and Purgatories. They share some hot milk, relaxing a bit and catching up, appreciating the small break and familiar company in the middle of the chaos. The kids are already asleep from exhaustion, showing how tough the frost area is even for adults. Leon explains to Zinc that his group is part of the Third Army, responsible for supplies and communication for the First and Second Armies, so they're staying put for now. Zinc realizes the support groups can end up stuck there for weeks or even months, which explains why everyone looks worn out and smells bad. Zinc offers Leon some water in exchange for info about the next floors. Leon says water is so scarce, they barely have enough to wash, but he agrees to the deal. He shares that floors 31 to 35 are a tropical jungle area. Most adventurers give up after the frost area, so even the guild doesn't know much about the lower floors. The big clans only share what they know if someone pays the right price, since that intel is so valuable. Zinc realizes that if he can make a map and a strategy guide for the jungle area, he'll get rich. He hands over the water barrels as payment, and Leon says it was a pleasure doing business. They part ways, with Leon telling Zinc to be careful out there. The group arrives at floor 31, which is the jungle area. Zinc and his party immediately notice how humid it is compared to the frost area they just left. Zinc explains that their main goal is to explore the new area, make a map, and create a strategy guide, which they can sell to the guild for a profit. The group is struggling with the heat, but Zinc is prepared and seems to have a solution ready. Zinc surprises everyone by making a special white cow milk sherbet using snow he gathered earlier. Nina and the others are amazed and love how cool and sweet it tastes, especially in the heat. Zinc explains that the milk sherbet is easy to make, just heat milk with sugar and freeze it, since white cow milk is already rich. He almost slips up about it being common in another world, but covers it up by saying he read about it in a book. Everyone is impressed, especially Nina. Zinc made cooling packs by freezing slime jelly and wrapping it in cloth, explaining they help cool you down if you put them in your pocket or around your neck. Ian calls Zinc a true merchant, already thinking about selling both sherbets and cooling packs. They then get ready to move on, reminding each other to stay aware using their perception skills. The group explores the jungle floor, collecting samples and observing the area. Nina gets excited about some fruit, and Zinc keeps taking notes. After a bit, Ian signals Zinc, and they agree they're done with this floor and ready to move on. The assassins talk about their plan, confident their disguise will trick Zinc and his appraisal skill. They're worried that if the assassination fails, everything will fall apart, since their power relies on Nazar's support. Meanwhile, Zinc realizes Queen Melissa and the king want him dead, and thinks about how they always know his location because of the guildmaster's intel. Zinc is shocked and starts to suspect that Dan-san might actually have a connection with the depths of purgatory. The thought makes him uneasy, especially since the guildmaster was mentioned in the conversation. Zinc explains to the group that not everyone from the depths of purgatory is a spy, but he suspects that a few spies ran through the maze just to keep an eye on him. Nina gets worried and wonders if Guildmaster Dan-san actually betrayed them. Zinc thinks that if Dan-san were truly a traitor, he would want Zinc gone too. Instead, Dan-san warned him about Rosarda's plot. Esther is suspicious, saying that as Guildmaster, Dan-san could help spies in many ways, and that it could all be a trick to gain their trust. Zinc isn't sure and keeps thinking about Dan-san's actions, especially how he helped with Ian's dad. The group discusses that there are two purgatories around, and both claim their info came from the Guildmaster, making everyone uneasy. They decide it's risky to linger in the maze, so Zinc says they should return to the surface and report everything to the guild. They also want to watch Dan-san's reaction when he hears the news, believing his face will reveal a lot. Zinc tells the group they can't let the purgatories realize they've figured out the assassination plan, so they need to act normal. Nina insists she'll be fine since she's 13 now, but Zinc points out she always shows her emotions. The conversation shifts to surprise about some news, as someone reacts with, "What? Are you sure?" Dan-san is shocked to learn that the depths of purgatory have been around for over 10 years and are actually Nazar intelligence officers. Zinc and the others are left speechless for a moment. Zinc then says that if the kingdom of Nazar is involved, he should report the situation to the king of Qual. The group realizes that having Nazar spies isn't enough to disband the purgatories, since the guild stays neutral. Zinc points out that if things escalate, it could start a war with Nazar, so they agree to leave politics to the kingdoms and handle the assassin themselves. Dan-san, determined, says that to take down such a big clan, they need solid proof, a failed assassination attempt. He asks Zinc to let him run the maze together to witness it firsthand. Zinc agrees to go together, but suspects there may be a trap. Meanwhile, the others realize they need to keep Dan-san away from the guild. Dan-san is questioned but stays quiet, and it's clear the group was prepared for this. In the end, the group makes it clear they won't be responsible for Dan-san's well-being in the maze. Dan-san admits he understands the group's distrust and says he'll handle things, promising to pull his weight in the maze. The group decides to leave the next day and goes to prepare. Later, Dan-san is seen alone, thinking about his connection to the depths of purgatory. Zinc reassures his brother that he's strong enough to handle the purgatories and gets ready for the mission. Afterwards, he prepares a report to send to the king. Zinc looks at a bottle of truth serum he kept from his noble days, thinking about how House Nonland used these drugs against enemies. Even though using it should be easy for him, he hesitates because of his conscience. The group meets up the next day in a restricted area, getting help from Dan to get inside. Zinc, holding the truth serum, reminds himself that everyone is in danger, not just him. He decides he can't let his guard down and chooses to wear a disguise to avoid being recognized. Before heading out, the group decides to buff Dan with enchanted bracelets to help him keep up, but they make sure not to use a max buff. Even with the boost, Zinc's stats are still higher, so he stays cautious. Once they're ready, they start moving towards floor 15. As they reach floor 14, Dan is exhausted from running through the maze for hours and needs a break. Zinc points out that he promised to keep up and carry his own weight. They decide to stop for a snack since there aren't any enemies around. Dan struggles with the fancy food, feeling outclassed while the group enjoys Nina's cooking. He realizes the others are showing off, and he's not used to this level of comfort in the dungeon. Dan is a bit defensive when asked about gambling. The protagonist suggests making a bet, but quickly switches the topic to a truth serum he brought along, explaining it was used in his old house to interrogate enemies, though he's not sure how strong it is. The group decides to have a drinking contest, using the truth serum diluted in water to test its effects. The protagonist admits he only brought the pure version and wants to experiment with the right dose, warning about the risks. Dan says he's prepared antidotes and that their party can use healing magic, but the others are worried since this serum has a history of causing psychological problems. Dan is surprised by the plan, but agrees to start drinking the serum first. The protagonist proposes a bet. If Dan wins, he gets a reward and meals with them. The real goal is to get Dan to confess what he knows about the purgatories, since the group finds it hard to believe the guildmaster was clueless about the situation. Dan accepts the challenge, even knowing the risks involved. The two prepare for the drinking contest, each determined to win, while the others watch the setup with some tension. Dan and the main character face off in a drinking contest, both determined. While they drink, the main character is haunted by memories of being called a dropout and told to leave. The tension rises as they continue, with both pushing themselves to the limit. The contest gets intense. The main character struggles but keeps drinking, while Dan stays focused and mocks his opponent's effort, both getting more exhausted as the challenge goes on. Dan suddenly starts hallucinating and feeling strange. He sees visions from his past, gets emotional, and begins to lose his composure as the effects of the drink kick in. Dan is overwhelmed by a terrifying vision, blaming him for the past, making him relive guilt. Meanwhile, the other character regrets not helping Dan sooner and realizes he should have acted, no matter what. Dan remembers meeting his friend again after a long time and finding him broken. He reflects on how he heard rumors of strong adventurers disappearing after joining the purgatories, but he only realized the truth after Zinc got involved. He recalls being told his friend died in a maze accident, blaming the Nazar group for what happened. Dan reflects on how the purgatory group became too powerful and how he couldn't stop them, wondering about the lives lost and the futures ruined because of his decisions. He realizes he never managed a real investigation due to their noble connections. Now, with Zinc's help, he finally has a chance to expose them and decides he won't run away anymore. Dan, after being overwhelmed and losing consciousness for a moment, suddenly wakes up. He's confused at first, but quickly remembers his resolve to protect Zinc and his friends, showing he's willing to risk everything for them. After using the truth serum, Dan and Zinc clear the air about their actions and apologize to each other. Zinc admits responsibility and asks for punishment, while Dan is understanding. The group reflects on what happened and realizes that Dan didn't leak any info to the enemy, but they're still unsure how the assassin got his information. Dan swears he never gave info to the enemy. As they question him, he remembers a fight from 5 years ago against a member of the Purgatories during a rank exam, where he lost badly. He recalls the guy's face, but doesn't know how that could have led to any intel leaks. The group decides they need to catch the assassin to find out the truth. A rare ability called empathy is explained. It lets someone who suffered a serious injury in the past read another person's thoughts and feelings, but it's really draining and can only be used once every 10 days. When it's activated, it reveals all the target's emotions and memories. Meanwhile, something is happening back in the jungle area. One of the spies who is using the empathy ability loses control and starts begging for it to stop, clearly in pain and panicking. The others try to figure out what's happening and wonder if their use of empathy was discovered. They notice this only started when the spy tried to connect with the guildmaster. The enemies realize something might have gone wrong with their spying and worry their plans have been exposed. They start to panic, thinking the guildmaster could be suffering. The leader immediately orders all assassins to hunt down their target, saying they can't wait any longer and must kill him. The group struggles with the companion's madness, his cries echoing as he collapses, leaving the others frustrated and helpless. The group's noise draws the attention of wyverns overhead. As the creatures descend with heavy wing beats, the soldiers try to move, but the broken man resists, lashing out and refusing help. Amid the chaos, the group argues whether to abandon their broken comrade or use him as bait to escape. Some insist on his value, while others stress survival against the wyverns. In the end, one member dashes off, leaving the others torn between loyalty and survival. The broken man is left behind, trembling as a wyvern looms over him. In an instant, the beast seizes him in its jaws and devours him, ending his suffering in a brutal display. The survivors flee while cursing Zinc, vowing revenge for being forced into this desperate situation. As they run with wyverns close behind, elsewhere a young man sneezes, unaware of the danger and hatred brewing. The group reaches the 26th floor, an icy dungeon that leaves them shivering. While they prepare their strategy, Zinc is urged to summon his monster to help, but he seems clueless, surprising the others with his lack of knowledge. Others explain that travelers usually summon monsters, suited for the cold to pull sleds or provide warmth. Since no one in the group can summon, they rely instead on an air curtain and lanterns to endure the freezing environment as they move forward. The group decides to push through the cold using their physical strength and fire magic. Zinc demonstrates his improved control over fire, creating warmth within the air curtain. While he focuses on maintaining the spell, he asks for protection, and despite doubts, his companion agrees to watch over him. On the 30th floor, the group faces the boss monster, an Arcoanth. Working together with swift attacks and powerful magic, they defeat it almost instantly, leaving their leader impressed by how quickly the battle ended. After defeating the floor boss, the group decides to rest and discuss their next strategy, instead of heading to the safe zone. With time before more monsters appear, they prepare a meal together, enjoying a brief moment of calm amidst the dungeon's dangers. As they eat, the group reflects on past tensions but pushes forward with determination. The leader outlines their next move, to explore the tropical floor while using their knowledge of the mapped area to strategically lure out the purgatories. The group prepares to move cautiously through the overgrown tropical floor, knowing both sides have equal challenges. They recognize it as a battle of patience and strategy, noting their enemies likely have inside information from the guild. With this in mind, they ready themselves to head toward the safe zone. The group enters the safe zone, trying to blend in and avoid drawing suspicion. As they walk calmly, other adventurers watch them closely, their wary gazes hinting at tension and unspoken rivalry. On the 7th day of exploring the tropical floor, the group takes a break at their camp. Thanks to the supplies stored in their magic item box, like baths and daily necessities, they manage to stay comfortable in the harsh environment, easing the strain of their long journey. The group remains cautious, noting that the purgatories haven't attacked yet. Zinc reflects on being on edge for a week, but realizes his perception skill has improved. Deciding to test his new ability, he prepares himself with determination. Zinc reveals he has enchanted his accessories to boost his perception, allowing him to sense the entire floor. While concentrating, he asks the others to protect him. As he focuses, a powerful surge of energy spreads out, expanding his awareness across the area. Zinc's perception expands across the entire floor, allowing him to sense every living being and even their mental states. He detects enemy movements, realizing that 4 purgatories are positioned near the entrance to the safe zone, likely attempting to cut off their escape route. Zinc confirms they are being followed, meaning the enemy's mission is still active. However, the pursuers don't react even when he acknowledges their presence aloud. After testing further, the group realizes the enemies can't see or hear them, yet continue to trail their movements. Zinc senses a stronger killing intent from their pursuers, realizing the enemy now sees them as an easy target after part of their group split off. Though the foes keep their distance, they remain close behind, waiting for the right chance to strike. Zinc proposes using himself as bait, planning to split off with Nina to lure the enemies into action. While some worry about the danger, the group agrees the plan could work, especially with Zinc's powerful enchantments and Nina strengthened by buffs to match their strongest fighter. The plan begins with Esther and Zinc pretending to practice water magic, spreading water across the area. However, the water is laced with a special drug that turns into a poisonous gas to slow the enemy's thinking. Since the group already took antidotes, they are fully prepared for the trap. To mask the faint smell of the drugged water, Nina prepares a meal, using cooking aromas as cover. With added wind magic to spread the food's scent, the group ensures their trap blends seamlessly into the environment. As they wait for their enemies to fall into the trap, Nina wrestles with the reality of what's ahead. She realizes that to protect her master, she may have to kill, a thought that troubles her deeply. Zinc reflects on her innocence, knowing that unlike nobles accustomed to bloodshed, Nina is just a village girl, facing a harsh truth. Zinc reassures Nina, telling her to focus on protecting herself while he handles the rest, reminding her they need the enemies alive. Grateful, Nina promises to do her best. With a confident grin, Zinc signals it's time for the final step of their plan, relying on Nina's support to complete it. Nina shyly feeds Zinc, who playfully enjoys her cooking and praises it enthusiastically. He teases her with exaggerated compliments, making her flustered, but their lighthearted exchange highlights their growing closeness amidst the tense situation. Zinc and Nina put on an affectionate display, acting like carefree lovers to strengthen their bait strategy. Observing from afar, their allies confirm the plan is working, noting how the enemy starved and desperate remains hidden, watching enviously, while the group enjoys food, baths, and comfort. The purgatories, driven by rage, hunger, and jealousy, draw nearer, unaware they're walking into Zinc's trap. The poison he spread will cloud their thoughts, leaving them vulnerable. Confident in their plan's success, the group acknowledges the tactic as dirty but effective, almost pitying their enemies. As Nina tends to Zinc to keep up their act, the pursuers finally reveal themselves, cursing the enchanter. Seizing the moment, the allies hidden nearby prepare to strike, ready to flank and surround the exposed assassins. The enemy group confronts Zinc and Nina directly, demanding their food and the girl. Armed and aggressive, they close in with threats, unaware they've already fallen into the carefully laid trap. The enemies surround Zinc and Nina, confident they've cornered their prey and celebrating their supposed victory. However, Zinc stays calm, knowing the ambushers haven't noticed Esther and the others hidden nearby, ready to strike back. The poisoned enemies begin to lose their composure, making disturbing remarks about Zinc and Nina. Their twisted behavior reveals the drug's effects taking hold, pushing them into recklessness. Fueled by aggression, they charge forward to attack. The enemies rush in, forcing Zinc and Nina to defend themselves. Zinc strikes with precision, struggling to hold back and avoid killing blows, realizing that fighting without lethal force is more difficult than expected. Zinc unleashes a fireball, blasting one of the attackers back in flames. He follows up with quick movements, striking down enemies while dodging their weapons. The battle intensifies as the attackers press forward with brutal swings. Zinc and Nina fight side by side, landing powerful blows against their enemies. Zinc takes down opponents with fists and strikes, while Nina defends herself, showing determination despite the chaos. Their teamwork keeps them standing as the battle rages on. In the heat of battle, Nina is suddenly grabbed by one of the enemies, who pins her down violently. Shocked and enraged, Zinc cries out her name as she struggles against her attacker, caught in a dangerous moment. Pinned down, Nina faces the enemy's taunts and threats as he blames Zinc for her situation. Zinc, enraged, prepares to fight back, while Nina, defiant despite her fear, declares with certainty that her master would never act like the villain before her. Summoning her strength, Nina fights back fiercely. She strikes her attacker with full force, breaking free from his grip and slamming him down, her rage and determination exploding as she calls him scum. Nina, furious and fearless, lashes out at her attacker, calling him out in disgust. As another enemy charges, she strikes back with her magic, launching a powerful water ball that slams into him, showing her resolve in battle. With a surge of courage, Nina smashes her shield into an enemy's face, shattering it with brutal force as she screams for them to stay away. Zinc, watching her newfound strength, is struck by how far she's come from the nervous girl she once was. The enemies, frustrated at being held back by just two kids, try to regroup, but their disarray leaves them open. Nina and Zinc's allies suddenly strike, turning the fight into a counterattack. Realization dawns on the enemies they've walked right into an ambush. The battle erupts in full force. Zinc and his allies unleash a coordinated assault. Swords clash, spells fly, and enemies fall one after another as the ambush takes its toll, overwhelming the attackers with sheer precision and strength. Dan fights ferociously, cutting down enemies with precision and strength, leaving his opponents in agony. With a smirk, he acknowledges Zinc, admitting that the battle has reignited his spirit, making him feel younger and sharper than ever. After the intense fight, the enemies are lying on the ground, defeated. Dan congratulates the group for a job well done and asks them to tie up the survivors. Zinc says he's fine and shows concern for Nina, who's still shaken and prefers not to go near the enemies. He reassures her, telling her to rest after everything she went through. The captured enemies are tied up while the group regroups after the battle. They ask about Nina, and Zinc explains that she wanted to take a bath to get rid of the bad smell and is also helping Ian set up camp. The group realizes how tough it must have been for her, since she's still just a girl. Zinc interrogates one of the prisoners, offering him truth serum to save time and avoid violence. The enemy, tied up and defiant, spits on the ground and refuses, making it clear he won't give in easily, and even taunts Zinc, telling him not to get cocky. Zinc, out of patience for provocations, drives his blade into the ground right next to the enemy, intimidating him. The man who was confident before gets scared when he sees how serious things have gotten. Zinc pretends to think about using cruel torture methods to get information, talking about cutting off fingers or gouging out eyes. The prisoner screams in desperation, believing the threats. Meanwhile, Dan coldly comments that back at the Nonland house, they were trained for situations like this, and says they can keep the pressure going as long as needed. Zinc pressures the wounded prisoner until he finally gives in and agrees to talk. Right after, another enemy tries to resist, but Zinc grabs him with surprising strength, leaving everyone stunned. Zinc uses his fire magic to torture the prisoner, slowly increasing the heat and threatening worse if he doesn't cooperate. The captive panics in pain, but Zinc stays calm, not afraid to take risks, since there are still many enemies left. Zinc threatens the captured group, showing no hesitation after all his experience killing monsters. He warns them that if they keep trying to kill him, he won't hold back, which leaves the prisoners scared and silent. One of the prisoners breaks and starts confessing everything out of fear. Zinc thinks to himself, wondering if his own personality is changing. Meanwhile, the other captives threaten him, saying he won't get away with what he's done and that more enemies are out there. Zinc warns the captured group that their actions count as treason against the guild. He explains that if they leave the maze, they'll face trial and severe punishment, possibly even execution or worse. He makes it clear that their fate depends on what they choose to say next, as he'll be a witness at their trial. The group learns that the depths of purgatory were created by Nazar to secretly drain Qual's resources and gather intel. They used merchants as spies and tried to weaken Qual by recruiting and abusing local adventurers. After Dan San's warning, the captured guys quickly start talking, revealing that the problem is much deeper than they thought. The group finds out the enemy had an empath who could dig into people's minds for information. Turns out, Dan San himself was the leak without knowing, because the empath was linked to his mind. After being hit with a psychological attack, the empath lost his sanity. Dan San recovers from the psychological attack, saying that what matters now is moving forward. He realizes the group had tricked him, and angrily confronts one of the prisoners. Prompt. After everything, the group talks about how to bring the captured enemies back to the surface, and how to explain what happened. While they wonder if they should make the prisoners walk, the protagonist says he has a better idea. At the same time, something is happening elsewhere. A group in cloaks stands near the bodies of slain dragons in the forest, guided by a leader giving precise instructions. Suddenly, a dragon rises up, but it looks like it's already badly wounded. The situation is tense, and something is about to happen at the marked time. A dragon is attacked by a group, but despite the chaos, a man with white hair and armor watches calmly. He thinks about how their second group was caught, but feels confident because of his ability, which he calls omniscience, so he isn't worried about the enemy's mage. The group transports prisoners using golems that carry cages. One of the men comments that using golems for this job was a smart idea. The prisoners are split into two golem-carried cages, troublemakers and those who cooperated. The uncooperative group gets worse food, floor spikes, and a medicinal drink instead of water, while the others get a slightly better deal. This setup prevents them from ganging up and shifts their frustration onto each other. The group discusses the prisoners' sanitary needs and notes that all captives are still dangerous. The prisoners are given underwear with extra-dimensional storage to act as diapers, but they still smell bad, so an air curtain is added. The golems require a lot of mana to maintain, but the group is glad they can manage it. Nina is impressed by the effort, while another girl comments she'd rather just make the prisoners walk in a line. The mood is a bit light, with some joking about learning from these punishments. Zinc and his ally realize the enemy's first legion, known for its dangerous aura, is coming straight at them. They talk about their strategy, knowing they need to take out specific threats early, especially Forbes, the leader, and Neville, as warned by their prisoners. Neville is the right-hand man and has the appraisal skill, letting him check stats but only with direct sight. He needs to be dealt with before he sees too much. The real threat is Forbes, the first Legion leader, who can use mana to see a few seconds into the future, making him S-rank in short battles. The group sets up a plan. They'll target Forbes with area attacks while his foresight is active. Dan and Ian will rush in after a signal, focusing on taking out enemy sorcerers. Nina and Esther will defend near the cages. Special goggles enchanted with appraisal will help them see the enemy's names and skills. Everyone gets ready for the fight. The two groups face off in the forest, tension thick in the air. The enemy mocks the guild for siding with the enchanter and warns them not to expect to leave the maze alive. The main group, confident, offers the enemy a choice: cooperate with the guild's investigation or suffer as slaves. A massive wave is summoned, crashing down on the battlefield. The group launches a powerful tsunami attack, overwhelming the enemies. Neville is taken out by a fast air attack. The enemy leader watches, realizing his foresight ability can't prevent everything, and the situation quickly gets out of control for their group. The group splits up as the enemy tries to target Zinc and the others. A chaotic fight breaks out, with everyone clashing and the battle spreading across the area. The protagonist attacks Forbes, but Forbes easily dodges every move, reading and countering each attack with calm precision. The protagonist tries to defend while making Forbes think he's attacking, but every move gets countered by Forbes' foresight. He realizes Forbes is only average as a swordsman and plans to wear him out. He quickly checks on Esther and Nina's situation. A group of hooded enemies approaches the protagonist and Nina. The enemies look confident, but as they attack, one of them suddenly slips and falls hard, caught off guard by something on the ground. The enemies rush forward but end up slipping and falling on the ground, unable to move properly. The protagonist explains to his companion that he cooked up some slime jelly and used his tsunami spell to spread it everywhere, making the area super slippery. He declares the plan a success. The girl confronts some enemies who tried to attack her brother. She uses powerful wind magic, first slashing with Air Slicer, then unleashing Air Cyclone, hitting the enemies hard and knocking them down. Zinc's group finishes off their side of the fight. Meanwhile, Forbes is forced to stay defensive, worried that if he turns his back on Zinc, he'll be taken out. He's stuck, unable to help his allies or escape the situation. Forbes gets surrounded by Zinc's group, who point their weapons at him from all sides. Zinc taunts Forbes, challenging him to use his foresight skill now that he's trapped with nowhere to go. Forbes gives up and surrenders to Zinc's group. Some prisoners are angry, but others quickly beg for mercy and offer to cooperate. Zinc says Forbes will get his own special cell and hints he can still be useful, while the group talks about having enough people to testify against the others. Zinc puts Forbes in a special cage carried by a golem and tells him they're heading to a safe area, promising warm clothes for the next zone. The other prisoners are annoyed, but Forbes is given water and thanks Zinc, realizing he's being treated a bit better. Zinc and the group continue moving the prisoners in golem cages, getting closer to the safe zone. As they travel, they discuss what explanation they'll give to the other clans about everything that happened. The group discusses how to handle the other clans when they reach the safe zone. Zinc suggests telling the truth, but there are concerns about loyalists attacking them. Dan-san promises to explain everything as the guildmaster, saying the other clans will listen, and that he'll handle any trouble without causing a scene. A confused ally arrives, asking Zinc about the situation. He's surprised to see Zinc and Dan-san with the captured prisoners in cages. Leon and his group arrive. Dan-san explains that the depths of purgatory tried to assassinate Zinc. The attackers have been captured, but the ones who ordered it are still at large. The prisoners worry about their fate as they're watched closely. Leon recognizes someone in the crowd, realizing he's from the 3rd Legion. Tension rises as everyone waits to see what will happen next. While Zinc and his group prepare to move out, someone from the 3rd Legion realizes Zinc managed to blend in with other clans to slip by. The 3rd Legion plans to make a scene, refusing to let Zinc get away so easily, and one of them starts to look pretty confident about their plan. Forbes, looking desperate, tries to warn Zinc to stop, saying there's still time. As Zinc approaches, Forbes insists that if Zinc goes further, they'll all end up dead. One of the 3rd Legion shouts for Zinc to die, ignoring Forbes' warning about the danger. One of the enemies creates a huge explosion and yells that they won't see them in court, clearly planning to destroy any evidence and escape. Zinc and the others react with shock as smoke fills the area and chaos breaks out around the prison cages. The prisoners set off an explosion, creating chaos and using the smoke to escape. Zinc and his group react quickly, but some captives are caught in the blast and confusion. One of the prisoners loses control and attacks with magic, causing chaos. Zinc quickly puts up a water wall for defense, realizing the attack is reckless since it puts allies in danger too. Zinc quickly slashes at the rampaging prisoner, stopping his attack. The fight ends with the prisoner injured and unable to continue. The group realizes one of the prisoners is a purgatory loyalist, and chaos breaks out. A fight starts among the prisoners, turning violent. They identify a purgatory loyalist among the prisoners. This sparks a violent fight, and several prisoners turn on each other, leading to chaos and deaths. The guildmaster orders all purgatory members to be brought topside and threatens arrest if they resist. He assigns simple jobs for them as compensation. The Elder Tree members thank him, and healing is given to those saved. The guildmaster says he needs witnesses from the group. The others admit their mistake for trusting purgatory. The captured enemy glares at him, hinting at future revenge, while the guildmaster calmly prepares for the next steps. Zinc uses fire magic to guide everyone through a cold area. The prisoners are transported in cages, while one of the captives holds up a flame to stay warm. The group moves forward, enduring the harsh environment. Zinc and his group arrive safely with the captured prisoners. They're met by guards, who confirm the prisoners are members of the depths of purgatory. Zinc reports that some died, but there are still witnesses left to testify, and some have connections to the kingdom of Nazar. The guards take the prisoners for investigation and ask Zinc to submit a full report later. After everything is settled, Zinc and his group finally get some rest, relieved that the ordeal is over. The group relaxes in a luxury room after all the chaos. They're glad to finally have real beds and talk about how intense everything was. They plan to finish their tasks tomorrow and get some rest for now. Daniel Fonker, a high-level duke and former prime minister, is introduced to Zinc to oversee his case. The group realizes the situation is serious since someone important like him got involved, but they're told to just act normal around him. Zinc tries to be formal with Daniel Fonker, but Dan is casual and even a bit rude. They reveal both are from the Fonker family, though Dan's from a poor knight branch. Dan talks about his tough childhood, growing up as a poor fifth son, while Daniel learned to manage lands at a young age. Dan grew up as a rascal, but the Fonker family took him in because of his potential. Later, Dan became an adventurer. Daniel offers to help Dan, since he's about to be expelled from the guild, and asks him to return. Zinc realizes Duke Fonker wants Dan back, and Daniel says he won't give up on him. Daniel shifts the conversation back to Zinc, asking his request. They discuss the evidence against the purgatories, with Zinc mainly wanting to avoid trouble for himself. Daniel explains the captured purgatories will be tried and sentenced, their assets seized, and the money used to compensate Zinc and Eldertree. Zinc asks about Marquess Patari. Daniel says Patari is already in custody after being caught trying to kidnap a servant. Terry was tortured for information, confessed his crimes and connections, and will be executed publicly since he has no powerful allies. After Nazar's attacks and Rosarda's attempt to kidnap Zinc, the kingdom decides to declare war on both Nazar and Rosarda. Zinc thinks about the coming war and the decision to send Marquess Panir's corpse to Rosarda. With Dan gone, the guild needs a new master, and Qual aims to secure its largest city to prepare for the battles ahead. Daniel explains he asked Dan to return to House Fonker for his own safety, with no intention to force him if he's safe. Meanwhile, Zinc worries about Dan's future if fired from the guild, and without a good position, Dan will lose his license and face prejudice from others. Zinc thinks about how to help Dan, then comes up with the idea to start his own clan, surprising everyone. Zinc decides to employ Dan as a low-level grunt as his punishment. He also plans to write a letter asking for leniency for Dan, and the Duke agrees to sign it too, making sure the officials can't ignore their request. A few days later, Dan formally requests to join Zinc's clan as part of his punishment. The guild decides he'll work under Zinc for 5 years as a mild disciplinary action, since ending his career completely would be too harsh given his skills. Thanks to Zinc's help and donations, his requests were met. Until a new guildmaster is chosen, Dan's wife Alpha, a well-known adventurer, is filling the role temporarily. Dan thanks everyone for their support and decides to put in the effort as a real member. Zinc suggests he could help train the maids, who want to get stronger. Dan accepts the task to train them back in the capital. Zinc buys an estate from a noble family to use as the clan's base, managing to get a good deal because the previous owner was connected to the purgatories. He suggests using enchanted items and training in the slime room to help the group grow stronger. Zinc is called to testify at a trial, but he notices the verdict is already set. Meanwhile, some banter happens about haggling over the estate price. The atmosphere is tense, with the trial being mostly a formality. Zinc gives an emotional testimony in court, claiming he overheard plans to assassinate him in the labyrinth. He exaggerates his fear and suffering, making everyone in the audience react with disbelief or annoyance. The court finds the accused guilty, calling them ruthless conspirators. Their sentence is harsh: 1,000 lashes, tattoos to mark their crimes, and a lifetime of hard labor as slaves. The crowd mocks the criminals after the sentence, shouting insults and telling them to disappear and live out their punishment somewhere else. A new character appears in the crowd. The group realizes he's the clan master of the emissaries, named Herbert. He and Zinc exchange intense looks. Herbert, the emissaries' clan master, stands out for his strength. Zinc notes he's skilled with a spear, and Herbert's stats show he's a high-level adventurer, tough and dangerous. Zinc is wary of Herbert because his spear gives him more reach and makes him a tough opponent for sword users and mages. Herbert is relaxed, asking for booze, not taking the situation too seriously. Herbert confronts the beaten group, reminding them of their betrayal. He threatens them but offers to let them off if they pay double the membership fee this month. The group, scared and desperate, quickly agrees. Herbert uses the moment to show everyone he's in control. The emissaries owe all their power to him, and even their members can't stand up to him. Meanwhile, one of the punished prepares for his turn at public shaming. Dan gets ready for his public shaming, joking about his reputation and new life in the clan. Zinc offers security, but Dan feels confident he'll be fine. Time passes, and the next phase approaches. Dan is tied to a pole in the square for his public shaming. The crowd just watches quietly while Zinc and his group keep an eye out, hoping nothing goes wrong. So far, everything is calm. Zinc suspects Herbert is planning something, not just recruiting old Purgatory members. He made sure Dan has a wind magic ring for safety, and backup is ready if anything goes wrong. Meanwhile, a group of tough-looking men approaches, hinting that trouble might be coming. The same guys Herbert was bullying earlier approach Dan's public shaming area, carrying something suspicious. Suddenly, they reveal weapons and start throwing them, clearly up to no good. Dan uses magic to block the weapons thrown at him, keeping himself safe. The guards step in, calling out the attackers, while the troublemakers mock Dan for using magic and try to play innocent. Zinc calls out the group for causing trouble and reminds them that the rules allow him to fight back. The men pretend they're just regular adventurers now, acting innocent, while Zinc realizes they're just covering up for Herbert. Zinc mocks the group for being fired and not understanding the rules. He points out that shady behavior follows them, no matter which clan they join. The men admit they bought broken weapons to use against Dan, and rumors spread about emissaries buying up junk in town. The group tries to explain all the broken weapons as old gear they bought to resell. Zinc is suspicious but decides to let it go, saying the guild will likely find them anyway. He also asks someone to check with blacksmiths about the story. The group is forced to leave, carrying all their broken weapons with them. One of them is frustrated, complaining about Dan always acting superior, and says he just wanted to teach Dan a lesson. They end up dumping their trash at the emissary clan house. Herbert gets mad at his underling after hearing their plan failed, and Zinc made a fool of them. The group complains that they're not recruiting enough people, and that the guild is keeping an eye on Dan's ally, Fonker. They also mention the guild got evidence from the blacksmiths, so their situation is getting worse. Herbert snaps and says Zinc is done for, determined to get revenge. Meanwhile, Zinc finds out his clan has been banned from every blacksmith in the city, and his ally arrives to report more news. Zinc's group finds out that all the vendors in the city were scared off by the emissaries, making it impossible for them to buy weapons locally. Still, they have another way. They can get supplies from the Lorentz firm, which has stores outside the city. Zinc isn't too worried and thinks Herbert's just a muscle-brained idiot, but this confirms the emissaries are trying to mess with them. Zinc and his group talk about how inconvenient the current situation is, especially with the emissaries messing things up. One of them suggests getting Duke Fonker involved to help. Meanwhile, two others joke around and try to lighten the mood, but everyone knows the emissaries are behind their recent troubles. 3 days later, they're still dealing with the fallout. Duke Fonker helps Zinc's group by spreading embarrassing rumors and gossip about Herbert and the emissaries. The clan's reputation gets even worse, and now Herbert and his crew can't even show their faces in town or recruit new people. The rumors are all over the place, some true, some fake, but they work, leaving Herbert isolated and the clan's image totally wrecked. To finish off their plan, Zinc's group opens a blacksmith shop managed by one of Duke Fonker's trusted merchants, making it a safe spot where the emissaries can't cause trouble. Zinc gives his maids alchemy enchantments so they can craft weapons and boost their mana at the same time. The shop runs smoothly and everyone seems happy, while Zinc gets ready to head back to the capital. Zinc decides to go to Rosarda for the official start of their offense, following Duke Fonker's advice. Dan offers to go with him, but Zinc asks him to stay in Gamma and keep the new guildmaster safe, since the emissaries might still target Zinc. Zinc prefers to lay low for now, just in case. Dan tells Zinc that he owes him a lot and brings up that the crown will probably ask Zinc the same thing. Why a kid like him is getting involved in war. Dan thinks no kid should have to go to the battlefield. The scene shifts to the royal capital Quallart, where Zinc is heading. Zinc arrives at the capital, noticing the heavy presence of soldiers because of the war. He attends a war council meeting with the king and several nobles, including Duke Fonker. Zinc says he wants to learn everything about the war effort. The atmosphere is serious, showing the importance of the meeting. The king rewards Zinc for his work during the espionage incident, giving him valuable resources from the crown. Zinc is also granted approval to change the status of his loyal servants, Ian and Nina, from slaves to citizens. Their slave contracts are officially turned into custodial agreements, marking a big change for them. Zinc is grateful to the king and plans to lift the servitude spells from Ian and Nina once he gets home, since they worked hard during the incident. Duke Fonker had helped by putting in a good word with the king. Zinc also wanted to give citizenship to Esther and Urza, but because of the unstable situation in Rosarda, he decides to handle it later, keeping them under his protection for now. Rosarda and Nazar are now at war, after breaking their alliance. Quoll is focusing its forces on the border, especially around the town of Korta. Both sides of the river have been barricaded, and Rosarta is too busy fighting Nazar to start trouble elsewhere. Civilians and child refugees are able to cross into Quoll's side, and adventurers stuck in Rosarda are being let in as well. Nazar now controls about a third of Rosarta's territory. But their army is dealing with a big problem. The climate and water in Rosarta don't suit Nazar's soldiers, so their troops are getting sick and using up their potion supplies faster than expected. This is partly because of poor sanitary conditions in Rosarta due to economic inequality. While Nazar looked like they might win, this situation is actually turning into an advantage for Qual. The king says that Rosarta is already finished, and Nazar's forces are weak from disease. He wants to take advantage and wipe out both sides at once to seize Rosarta. The problem is, they've prepared a large stockpile of potions and water to fight the Rosartan diseases. But they don't have enough bags of holding to move them all. They want Zinc's help with this plan. Zinc suggests that instead of making a bunch of bags of holding, they should use a water magic enchantment so everyone can make their own water, since the soldiers should have enough mana for that. He's fine with supplying these enchantments for drinking water, but he reminds them that he didn't want the military using his enchantments for everything. Zinc then says he's willing, but only if they accept his condition. Zinc says he doesn't want the bracelets to be monopolized. He asks that after the war, half of the bracelets should be sold to the people, especially adventurers and merchants in the Labyrinth City. The king agrees and promises to make sure the bracelets go to those who need them. The conversation then shifts to the real problem, the conflict with Nazar. Agurably Duman Nazar. In Nazar, the powerful necromancer family House Bernhard awaits. The scene shows undead zombies and skeletons, with a cloaked figure summoning them, highlighting the threat they pose. House Bernhard is introduced as a powerful family of high-ranking nobles in Nazar, closely connected to the royal family. They're known for their necromancy, but only a few are born with this power. The country usually uses them only as a last resort because of how intimidating they are. The leaders discuss the threat of House Bernhard's necromancers, noting only 8 are known, but their abilities are dangerous. Necromancers in battle can control corpses regardless of decay, making them tireless and immune to poison, which could easily change the outcome of any fight. Even outnumbering them would come at a high cost. The group weighs options to deal with the necromancers, discussing whether to destroy all corpses or target the necromancers directly. Zinc suggests avoiding direct conflict with House Bernhard, instead using magic, ambushes, and sabotage to weaken their forces and supplies from the shadows. The king and his advisor agree to follow Zinc's plan, which aims to crush enemy morale despite some losses. Meanwhile, Zinc starts producing a large batch of enchanted items to support the plan. Alexander from the Dragon Tears arrives at the capital, surprising Zinc and his group. They greet each other, and Alexander mentions his group set up shop after bringing Esther to Qual. Zinc welcomes him and asks how he can help. Alexander asks Zinc if the Dragon Tears can join his new clan, and Zinc happily accepts since he was looking to recruit new members. They agree to set up a magical contract for safety. Meanwhile, another group talks about the Sacred Flame members joining the war effort against Rosarta. Zinc and Alexander talk about the current situation. The guild is recruiting mercenaries, but things are complicated by the emissaries, who have a grudge against them. Zinc warns Alexander to wait before traveling to Gamma, since Duke Fonker should resolve the situation soon, making it safer. A few days later, a formal assembly is held at the palace, where the kingdom declares they won't forgive Rosarta for dishonoring them. Meanwhile, Zinc arranges membership for Alexander below market price. The weapon market in Gamma is in chaos because blacksmiths are selling everything cheaply to Duke Fonker, who resells at a price no one else can match. The blacksmiths want Duke Fonker to succeed, even if it hurts the emissaries. The king makes a royal declaration, blaming Nazar for their invasion and secret dealings. In front of everyone, he orders the execution of a prisoner, showing his resolve and authority. The king raises his sword and officially declares war on both Nazar and Rosarta in front of his assembled army. The soldiers respond with a roar, ready for battle. War breaks out with Qual attacking the 3 border towns of Rosarta. The Rosartan army is spread too thin and loses quickly. Count Brand, leading Corda's army, takes full control of the city. Later, Zinc is greeted at the Brand estate. Zinc meets the twins, Lewis and Roy Hughes, who were his classmates in the magic department at school. They talk about joining the Count's army along with Chris to make a name for themselves. Thanks to Zinc's warning, they avoided getting caught up in a hostage situation during the war. Zinc talks with Chris and the twins about what's happening in Quoltra. Chris explains that his father is taking the weapons and assets from any Rosartans left in the city, and some nobles are facing public execution. Most civilians have been enslaved to serve nobles as farmers or house staff, but their children will get an education and eventually receive citizenship. Chris explains the military plan. After his father secures their area, he'll join other populists to march on the royal capital. Once they take the capital, they'll deal with any remaining Rosartan and Nazar forces. Chris says he'll join the fight after gaining some experience. Zinc asks how he can help, and Chris says he'll mostly stay with his father. only fighting when it benefits them, even if that won't make him popular with other soldiers. Zinc tells a boy that after becoming a citizen, he can join Chris in the Count's army to fight against Nazar. The boy gets emotional and starts to cry, surprised by the offer. The maids tease Zinc for making Esther cry. Esther feels unwanted and upset, but Zinc explains that he wants Esther to have a life-changing experience and become stronger, no matter what path he chooses. Zinc prepares Esther for battle, giving him enchanted items and arranging for Ian to protect him in the rear guard. Esther is grateful, but wants to handle things on his own. Zinc is told to make sure Ian stays with Esther for his safety, while Dan is going to settle his own issues with Nazar. Zinc officially forms his clan called Regalia, joined by Alex and the Dragon Tears group. The guild recognizes Regalia as an A-rank clan. Esther, determined to honor his older brother, promises to make him proud. While Daniel is celebrating his recent successes and showing off his power to the branch families, some nobles discuss how he wiped out his political enemies and took control of Gamel. However, his boldness makes him vulnerable. One noble, unable to find any dirt on him so far, starts thinking about causing an unfortunate accident to bring Daniel down. Some nobles complain about being kept waiting and not seeing any servants, feeling disrespected after all their effort. Suddenly, a large blade crashes through the door, taking them by surprise. A muscular man bursts through the door, demanding Fonker's whereabouts. The nobles panic, shouting for help and calling him an intruder, clearly terrified by his sudden entrance. Intruders storm the room searching for Fonker, but he's nowhere to be found. The attackers threaten the nobles, demanding answers and making it clear that no matter what, their fate is sealed. Zinc is shocked to learn that the emissaries attacked the Fonker estate, but he's relieved to hear that Fonker is safe and currently in the capital for a meeting with the king. He receives a letter with more details about what happened. Herbert and the emissaries tried to capture Zinc and the Duke by force after their blackmail plan failed. The blacksmiths were forced to join in, but the Duke escaped with help from merchants who warned him in advance. The emissaries have been isolated for a while, and although the Duke is safe, Zinc still worries about the damage the emissaries could cause. Duke Fonker invited his enemies from the branch families to a party, and they were all found dead at his estate. Now, Herbert and the emissaries are wanted men, and a punitive expedition is expected soon. Zinc thinks Duke Fonker is pretty scary after hearing what happened. Zinc confirms he'll attend the audience the next day and sends his regards to the Duke. He thinks about how the emissaries' attack wasn't a surprise, but admires how the Duke used the situation to eliminate his enemies. Meanwhile, something crashes with someone reacting in shock. Herbert stands frustrated, surrounded by his men. He realizes Fonker has trapped him, and they'll lose their licenses. With both Rosarda and Nazar in bad shape, Herbert knows they're out of options, and wonders where he can go next, refusing to stay in his current situation. Herbert tells his group to get ready. They're heading to Yamato. The men are confused and worried about getting caught on the way, but Herbert hints he has a secret plan for their escape. A secret passage on the 67th floor of the Maze of Gamel connects directly to the Maze of Yamato, making it possible to move between the two locations. Even though Yamato is right next to Qual, it stands out with its own culture. The people there wear Japanese-style clothes and mostly live in wooden houses with tatami mats, making the place look and feel like historic Japan. Herbert and his group realize the maze really does connect to Yamato, which is officially allied with Qual, but smuggling still happens between them. Escaping through the maze won't be easy, but at least they won't be wanted on the other side. Excited, the group rushes to pack their supplies. Herbert feels he had no choice but to share his secret with his group and urges them to be useful. Meanwhile, inside the Gamma maze, another group is launching magic attacks, staying alert for any threats. The group manages to defeat all the monsters in the slime room, working together and supporting each other. The teamwork pays off, and some members mention how quickly they've improved their magic skills thanks to Zinc. Everyone feels accomplished, and Dan-san is thanked for his help with the maids. With only a week left, Zinc encourages everyone to train hard and make it count. The group focuses on leveling up in the maze, especially Esther, Christ, and the others who will be going to battle soon. As their training wraps up, they prepare to leave, and Zinc asks Dan-san to look after Esther. Zinc confirms he's joining the emissary strike force, saying he wants to help clean up the mess. The guildmaster Alpha agrees and tells him to call her by her name. Meanwhile, most of the enemy's 2nd Legion has already been taken into custody, and the 1st Legion escaped into the maze. The group talks about Herbert, who escaped while his group was asleep. Clearing the dungeon is tough, even for someone as strong as him. Reports suggest he's moving fast and is between floors 16 and 30, but survivors are rare. The upper dungeon floors are safer because they're crowded, but going deeper is risky. There's no confirmation that the 1st Legion is killing witnesses in the maze, but everyone's cautious. The group finishes their discussion. The emissaries in custody will be made slave soldiers for House Fonker, and any assets they had will go to the group as a reward. Zinc agrees to the terms, but he seems distracted, catching the attention of Mona. Zinc notices that Alpha seems down, and Mona explains it's because Dan has been too busy with work and protecting Esther to spend time with her. Since Dan is heading to the front lines soon, the couple won't see each other for a while, and Zinc blames himself for it. Zinc approaches Alpha and apologizes for keeping Dan away from her because of work. Alpha says there's no need to apologize since Dan chose to go to the front lines himself, and he's a member of Zinc's clan. Zinc then offers her a gift. Alpha receives a box and discovers it's something Esther managed to take when she fled, but that she has no use for it. She thanks him, saying she'll put it to good use that night, and asks if they like it. Esther complains about her back, but says she deserves it. The group says goodbye and prepares to hunt down the emissaries, awaiting the start of the mission. Kanan introduces herself as the leader of the emissary strike force and presents her main members, Shulf, Iosif, Benjamin, and Dietrich. Kanan is a high-level fairy summoner with impressive stats and skills. The group is ready and greets the others. Zinc is impressed by Kanan's small and cute appearance, but even more by her powerful stats. Kanan explains to the group that they'll chase the emissaries into the maze and have two possible routes to take. She asks Zinc to decide which route, mentioning that one is more dangerous and needs his explicit consent. They reveal there's a hidden entrance to the Gamma Labyrinth, sealed underground in a high-security prison. It's a massive hole that drops straight to a lower floor, letting them take a shortcut. This entrance is rarely used and is a closely guarded secret. Zinc had never heard of it before. Zinc has to decide between two routes, taking the risky shortcut to catch up to Herbert quickly, or going the long, safer way from the first floor, which would take much longer. The shortcut is too dangerous for Nina, so they decide to check things out before making a choice. Zinc decides to take the risky shortcut with Kanan, ready to start the hunt for the emissaries. Kanan agrees, but reminds him he can change his mind any time. The group gets moving, determined to catch up fast. Zinc and the group rappel down the massive pit, feeling the danger as space is warped inside the labyrinth. Zinc is scared, but determined to press on, knowing a fall would be fatal. The splinter group above promises to guard the rope. The group successfully reaches the bottom using the rope. They talk about how some thrill-seekers have even climbed up this dangerous route, even without wings. Even though the S-ranks seem brave, they admit they feel fear too. They just hide it better. The group faces the orc boss on floor 15 and quickly defeats it. They move on and reach the 21st floor, which is a grassland area. Someone points out something for Zinc to look at. Zinc's group spots two injured emissaries in the grass. They decide to capture and interrogate them, approaching carefully while staying hidden. Zinc's group realizes the two men are exhausted and can't hear them. Their stats reveal crimes like blackmail, robbery, and murder. They're the ones who attacked the Fonker estate. Zinc's group makes their move and confronts them. A fight breaks out between Zinc's group and the two criminals. Zinc's group quickly overwhelms and defeats them. The order is given to tie up the captured men. Zinc's group restrains the two captured men and tries to question them about Herbert's location, but they refuse to talk. Kanan steps in, preparing to use magic to handle the interrogation. Kanan summons a massive emperor slime. The captives panic as the slime grabs one of them, making them desperate to get away. Kanan uses the emperor slime to threaten the captives, dissolving one's arm. Terrified and in pain, one of them begs for mercy and is about to reveal what he knows about Herbert. The group learns that Herbert is on floor 46, in the volcanic area. As they approach, they see monsters fighting and the dangerous landscape ahead. The protagonist learns that someone has already reached the volcanic area on floor 46, which surprises him. He thinks about the challenges of the desert and volcanic zones on the previous floors and notes that even strong adventurers would struggle to keep up. He realizes that the toxic area lies beyond, and this might be why nobody has managed to explore deeper than floor 60-inch the maze. The group explains that Herbert sent them to get more food since he eats a lot of meat daily. When he ran out, he got violent, so they decided to turn back after he abandoned them. One of them mentions having a magic bag sewn into his clothes. The protagonist checks the magic bag and confirms they brought plenty of potions, which helped them get this far, but they eventually ran out of supplies. While looking through some documents, they discover records of bribes, secret accounts, and various expenses for extortion and damages. The protagonist realizes the discovered accounts could be valuable evidence for Duke Fonker, though one captive claims they're just personal notes. The group decides to retreat and rejoin their allies, planning to hand the captives over to the authorities before continuing their mission. The captives worry about their fate. The protagonist tells the captives they'll be sentenced to slavery and probably sold by Duke Fonker. He mentions that they might end up as laborers or used as meat shields in a war, making it clear their future won't be easy. While waiting for the group to arrive, he and his companion decide to keep talking, teasing the captives a bit. Someone eats and drinks quickly. Meanwhile, the volcano rumbles and a group gathers near its base, with monsters nearby. Herbert eats a large meal with satisfaction, while others quietly watch. He finishes, clearly pleased, and tosses a bone aside. Herbert's group realizes they need to ration food, but with no way to resupply, Herbert suggests hunting an Arcoanath, despite the risk. The others question his eating habits given the situation. Herbert explains that only pack leader Arcoanaths drop meat, while hatchlings just drop cores. The group realizes it'll take a week to get through the volcanoes, and Herbert insists on hunting rather than starving. The monsters here are tough variants, just like the dangerous ones from earlier floors. Herbert rallies the group, telling them there's no turning back, and they must reach Yamato. He reminds them they're the first army and should act like it. Despite his words, he knows everyone's speed and morale have dropped since entering the desert and volcano areas. Herbert worries that Zinc, known for his speed and magical enhancements, could catch up quickly if he joins the strike force or uses a shortcut. He realizes they might be closer than expected. Zinc's group leaves the grassland, using enchanted items to chase Herbert at full speed. Their only focus is catching up to him. Zinc's group reaches an area near the volcanoes and finds a still warm campsite. Realizing someone passed through recently, possibly the emissaries or other adventurers, the M group realizes they're getting close to Herbert, having seen no other adventurers since the desert. They credit Zinc's speed for their progress and remind each other to stay alert, knowing there could be more dangers ahead than just the emissaries. Herbert's group stands at the edge of a massive pit, knowing they must also watch out for dangerous Arcoanath variants. Herbert's group spots a pack leader's nest and plans to fight it if it's alone, but they quickly realize angering it will cause its partner to show up, making things much riskier. Herbert tells everyone to attack with everything they have as soon as the monster appears, since these variants can spit fire and call for help, making them very dangerous, if not taken down fast. Herbert and his group are ambushed by another team, who block their path and declare that they have them cornered. Tension rises as both sides prepare for a confrontation. Herbert, furious at being caught, threatens the opposing group. Both sides get ready for a fight, with archers aiming and everyone charging into battle. Not Zinc's group charges at Herbert's team, aiming to finish the fight quickly before the monster variant wakes up. Both sides rush into battle. Zinc targets the enemy sorcerers first, dodging attacks and launching his own spells as the battle intensifies. Zinc attacks Herbert with a powerful strike, sending him flying and causing rocks to shatter. The fight between them heats up. Zinc clashes with Herbert, who skillfully wields a spear, making it hard for Zinc to find an opening. Zinc thinks about how the sorcerers will attack if he tries to retreat. Zinc uses an air tornado spell to knock Herbert back. Cannon arrives to help Zinc, surprising Herbert and turning the tide of the fight. Cannon's group manages to push back the emissaries below, aiming to capture them alive, which slows them down. Meanwhile, Herbert's side realizes the situation is getting too dangerous and calls for magic support against the pack leader. One of Herbert's men snaps, declaring he's done following him, and calls Herbert a tyrant. Herbert grabs him and throws him off the cliff, telling him to die. The man Herbert threw is immediately eaten by a giant monster. Zinc and Cannon are shocked that Herbert sacrificed his own ally. Herbert laughs as the giant monster, now fully awake, roars. He taunts Zinc, believing the chaos will stop his pursuers from catching him. The giant variant monster wakes up, roaring loudly, and catching everyone's attention, putting the group in immediate danger. Herbert yells for his group to escape as the monster attacks. He leads those who can still run away, while Cannon and the others try to stop him from fleeing. Cannon and Zinc are shocked that Herbert sacrificed his own ally to the monster. As the Arcoanath charges, Ian reports they've captured half the emissaries, but some have escaped. Zinc prepares to face both Herbert and the monster. Zinc decides to chase Herbert alone and asks Cannon to team up with Ian to handle the monster. Cannon agrees, and they split up to deal with both threats. Zinc runs off to chase Herbert, leaving Cannon and the others to handle the monster. Cannon gets ready to use wind magic, while Ian's group secures the prisoners and warns them to stay still if they don't want to be eaten. Cannon attacks the monster with wind magic, aiming to slice it up. Meanwhile, Ian charges in to help with the fight. Ian takes a hit from the monster's tail, but barely feels it thanks to his enchantments. He stands his ground, ready to keep fighting. Ian and the others attack the monster together. The captured enemies realize there's no chance of escape, but then notice the monster's attention turning toward them. A group of monster hatchlings approaches the tied-up prisoners, who panic and try to keep them away. Zinc observes the chaos and thinks about how the enemy leader's actions have caused this mess. Zinc tells the prisoners that Herbert woke the monster just to escape, showing how little he cared for his own men. Meanwhile, Cannon attacks the monster with her air slicer spell. The monster heads toward a pool of lava, trying to cross it, while the group realizes the danger. Cannon reacts in shock as it moves forward. The monster grabs onto the edge and calls its partner, and now there are two of them, ready to fight. The group realizes the situation just got worse. The two monsters attack from the lava pool, making it hard for the group to fight back. Cannon says they need to fall back and lure the monsters out, realizing they're at a disadvantage. One of the guys, Iosef, is injured in the chaos. The group charges at the two monsters, planning to separate them. Cannon says to focus on the weaker one first. Iosef heals his wound with Ian's help, and they know they have to lure the second monster away, or they're in trouble. The monsters counterattack, forcing the group to defend themselves. The team launches magic and attacks to push the monsters back, trying to keep their formation. The group keeps running, chased by the persistent enemy. Even after all the running, Zinc isn't tired at all, which surprises them. The group tries to block Zinc, but he easily takes them down, scaring the others. Zinc takes down the enemies blocking his way and slashes at the hooded figure, not letting anyone slow him down. Zinc lands a strong hit on the last enemy blocking his path, knocking him aside. Now, only Herbert stands in his way. Zinc tells Herbert he's not here to play the hero or act all righteous. He says he hates people who use others as pawns just to save themselves, comparing Herbert to a supervisor he hated at his old job. He makes it clear he can't stand guys like Herbert. Herbert looks frustrated and tries to say something back. Herbert tries to block Zinc's attack with his spear, but Zinc throws a water ball at him. Herbert quickly dodges, taunting Zinc and saying, "Ha, I'm over here." Zinc uses the water ball to create a cloud of steam, blocking Herbert's vision. Herbert looks around, realizing Zinc is gone, and gets frustrated, calling him sneaky. Zinc surprises Herbert by suddenly showing up behind him and declaring that it's over. Herbert reacts quickly and tries to attack, but something unexpected happens to his weapon, making him confused. Zinc uses a powerful water cyclone spell. Herbert gets caught up in the swirling water, getting slammed around and sent flying. Zinc's group finds him lying on the ground. Hanan apologizes for being late, and Zinc says he made a decoy out of earth magic, joking it can't move, just like Herbert. Meanwhile, Herbert is on the ground, barely conscious, swearing revenge and mumbling threats. A giant slime appears above Herbert, surprising everyone. It's called an Emperor Slime. The slime drops down and completely engulfs Herbert, trapping him inside. Herbert is trapped and suffocating inside the slime, looking like he's in pain. Someone asks if they're trying to kill him, but the girl explains it's just to keep him from escaping. He'll lose most of his skin but won't die. She wants to carry him out as a warning to others. Now that Herbert is dealt with, the group talks about transporting the other prisoners using golem cages. The main guy thinks to himself that Herbert isn't a concern anymore. He then wonders if Esther and Dansan managed to reach Rosarda safely. The protagonist arrives with his group at a large, organized military force, Count Brand's main company. As he walks forward, he thinks about how he never expected to return to his homeland after leaving it behind. Chris reunites with his father in the Rosarda territory, promising to bring honor to the family as the heir of House Brand. The group is formally welcomed, and Esther is recognized for gaining citizenship and an A-rank license. The Hughes brothers and Dan are also acknowledged for joining the effort. The group discusses their current strategy. Harrods is their base of operations, and the next target is Salagild, which is held by Nazal forces. Rosarda territory is slowly being taken over by Nazal, but the capital, Tar, is under Quoll control, with some remaining resistance. The situation is basically a war between Rosarda and Nazal, fought in Rosarda territory. Chris and his group report that they've been training and hunting monsters to stay ready for combat. The commander confirms. Chris has learned offensive spells from his training. As they prepare to move out, Chris is reminded that this will be his first real battle, and is given a word of caution because this is war. The commander tells everyone not to see their enemies as humans, pushing them to be ruthless. He says that in war, mercy and virtue will only break a soldier's mind. Even though the enemy has families and feelings too, the reality of having to kill weighs heavily, especially for those not used to battle. Chris and Esterkun are told by the commander that if things get too rough, they should ask to be sent home. Chris accepts the advice. Later, Chris prepares for the upcoming battle, thinking about spear training and noticing how the veteran soldiers carry themselves, especially someone called Dan the Butcher. Some soldiers talk among themselves about Chris, Esther, and the Hughes brothers, saying the future of House Brand looks solid. They doubt Esther's abilities, thinking he only got attention because he's Zinc's brother, and even make fun of his appearance, questioning if he can fight. Esther overhears, keeping a serious face. Dan catches some soldiers gossiping about Esther and immediately confronts them, scaring them off. He asks Esther if he's really okay with letting people talk like that. But Esther says he's used to being gossiped about back in Rosarda and expects it because of his position. Anne tells Esther he's a bigger man than the others, but suggests teaching them a lesson if they keep causing trouble. Esther says he doesn't want to make a scene or damage his brother's reputation. He remembers how the Brand Company soldiers got a bad impression of him back in Rosarda, since the commoners spread rumors and hated nobles, blaming them for fleeing with their wealth when the kingdom fell. Dan says he'll step in if things get out of hand. Esther thinks that if he shows the Brand soldiers his skills in battle, maybe they'll accept him. Dan suggests they go ask Count Brand directly. As they arrive at the mansion, Count Brand greets them, saying he needed to talk and has something to discuss with them. Count Brand says he's received many letters from Zinc describing Esther's achievements. He offers Esther a spot in his personal guard to earn valor and suggests making him a platoon commander, but warns that some soldiers might be against it. Even though Esther is A rank, he thinks it's a relatively safe way for Esther to prove himself and asks for his opinion. Dan asks if Count Brand is ignoring the soldiers who spoke badly about Esther. Count Brand says he punished them, but it just made things worse. So, giving more penalties would hurt morale. Esther apologizes for the trouble, but Count Brand says his own leadership is at fault. Esther then asks if he can make a request, and Count Brand tells him to go ahead if it's within his power. Esther asks to fight on the front line to prove himself. Count Brand hesitates, worried that something might happen to Esther and that Zinc would blame him for it. Esther explains that he's learned magic from his brother and is skilled as a solo fighter. He believes that if he can show his skills in battle, the rumors about him will stop. Count Brand says that the Nazal force doesn't have any famous warriors, but the battle will still be tough. Dan promises to watch over Esther so he doesn't go overboard. Count Brand agrees to let Esther fight at the front line, but tells him to retreat if he's ever in danger. Esther thanks him for the chance. A flashback shows that a few days before Esther and the others joined the Brand Company, a fight was going on. Gordon Nonland, a Rosarda slave soldier, defeats an enemy in battle and takes a moment to catch his breath. Gordon stands his ground against overwhelming numbers. The guards and slaves try to stop him, but he's too skilled. The commander, seeing Gordon's strength, realizes their gear is no match and hesitates as Gordon faces a new armored enemy. Gordon faces death in battle and remembers his painful past, controlled by his father, forced to kill his wife, and abandoned by his son Esther, who chose Zinc over him. He accepts that he'll die as a slave, believing Esther will never forgive him. Gordon is fatally struck in battle. In his last thoughts, he wishes he could apologize to Esther if they meet again in the afterlife. The army launches an assault on the fortress, using mithril spikes to scale the walls. Dan and Esther lead the charge as their commander orders the attack. Archers rain arrows down from the wall, but Dan uses a shield spell to protect Esther. The troops bring up a battering ram, working with mages to break through the fortress gate. Esther uses a powerful air cyclone spell, sending enemies flying and blasting open the way forward. Esther quickly takes down the enemies on the wall with swift, precise sword strikes. Dan protects the group with his air shield, while Esther charges forward, cutting down enemies. The rest of the soldiers get motivated and join the attack to reclaim Soghild. Dan and Esther fight their way through enemies, while the soldiers use a battering ram to break open the gate. Esther heals himself after the fight. Dan checks on him, and the soldiers charge through the now open gate. The soldiers thank Esther and Dan for their help. Some admit they misjudged Esther, and now respect him more. Esther and Dan move to help with the fight in the city. Esther gets separated from Dan in the city. While fighting off enemies, he hears someone call him a monster, and senses something strange nearby. He tries to find his way back. Esther finds his father mortally wounded and surrounded by bodies, shocked by the scene in front of him. Necromancy is revealed as the enemy's trump card. Corpses and skeletons, including familiar faces, rise and attack without feeling pain or fatigue, creating chaos and dropping morale among the living. Esther realizes there's something more going on with these undead. Esther is forced to fight his own father, who's now an undead. During the clash, Esther notices that his father still shows signs of awareness, shocking him. Esther's father, now a zombie, begs for forgiveness and admits his failures. Meanwhile, skeletons appear, and one of them, claiming to be Esther's grandfather, greets him. Esther faces his resurrected grandfather and other skeletons. The skeletons discuss how the executed are being revived by Nazar. Esther's father, near death, says he wants to possess a monster to help Esther, while the others argue it's the only way for their souls to move on. Esther's father feels he can't help as he is, and is called pathetic by the others. Esther says he hasn't forgiven his father, but acknowledges a debt for being raised. They share one final tense moment as a family. Esther uses magic to perform last rites for his father, setting him ablaze and ending his suffering. The scene is silent and heavy as he watches his father's body burn. Esther attacks and destroys the skeleton, shattering its skull. The remains collapse, ending the threat. Esther realizes the necromancer must be nearby since the corpses are moving. He prepares to use a special perception ability, calling on his brother's power to sense the enemy. The necromancer is frustrated after losing sight of his targets and considers using the bodies of fallen soldiers to create a stronger fighter. Meanwhile, Esther senses the necromancer's location and knows he needs to act quickly before backup arrives. Esther unleashes Air Cyclone, creating a huge tornado that sweeps up the necromancer and enemy soldiers, scattering them and stopping their advance. The enemies are thrown to the ground by Esther's attack. The allied soldiers rush in to finish them off. The necromancer, wounded and shocked that a kid beat him, tries to crawl away. Esther finishes off the necromancer with a spear thrust, ending the fight and declaring his victory to everyone watching. Esther happily thanks everyone, bringing a bottle as a gift and hoping they enjoy it. The people celebrate, raising their swords in the air. At the Regalia clan house, Esther gives a rare vintage as thanks for help in the A-rank advancement exams. Luke, the clanmaster, appreciates the gesture. Flashbacks show intense moments from the exam, with Nina and Ian proving themselves as strong fighters, making even Luke feel his life was at risk. After returning from the maze, they discuss the lack of A-rank adventurers in Gamma. Thanks to Zin's efforts, breaking down 2 major clans, Gamma is now safer. Most top-ranked adventurers are now from Elder Tree, and Regalia is seen as their main competition. Luke proposes an alliance between Regalia and Elder Tree to avoid conflict and not repeat the mistakes of the previous clans. Both agree it's best for Gamma if they keep a good relationship. Meanwhile, Elder Tree affiliates are joining the war effort, aiming to strengthen their position. The Rosartan king and nobles are executed after Qual forces take the capital. The event is broadcasted using a magic artifact. Meanwhile, the clans decide to make their new alliance official at the guild, turning it into a party with food and wine. The king and nobles are executed by being boiled alive. The king curses the protagonist with his last breath. The protagonist watches his own father die but feels nothing. The kingdom of Rosarta falls. The protagonist feels relieved, but is now worried about Esther and the others on the battlefield. Duke Fonker arrives to speak with him. They discuss the fall of Rosarta, which opens sea access for Qual. With coastal control, Qual can now trade and build a navy. Duke Fonker hints that the protagonist was considered for Rosarta's throne, but he refuses the offer. The main threat left is the Nazar army. After the war, Crown Princess Negenda became the ruler of Rosarta, but mostly stays in Qual. She led the field army during the conflict. The protagonist just wants to hire more people and avoid more trouble. Negenda also spared the land where Rosarta's maze is located. A small elf girl appears, catching everyone's attention. The maids are completely charmed and call her cute, reacting with excitement. The elf girl introduces herself as Marina, a fairy with strong summoning magic talent. She joins the group, and everyone is hopeful she'll become a powerful ally. Zinc puts Urza in charge of training the maids and managing the household. He mentions having many slaves and staff for security and running things. Urza is grateful and says she'll stay by Zinc's side. They plan to get her citizenship, leaving their old worries behind. Marina asks if she really doesn't have to be kept in a cage. Zinc tells her she's free to go wherever she wants, just to stay nearby when outside. It's revealed Marina was once owned by a noble, which explains her confusion. Marina's old owner was abusive and had a bad temper, beating his slaves whenever anything went wrong. He never physically hurt Marina because fairies are valuable, but he kept her locked in a small cage and sometimes denied her food when he was in a bad mood. When he needed money, he ended up selling Marina at the marketplace. Marina says she doesn't remember her parents because they both died when she was little. She also can't read, but Nina gets emotional and promises to make her lots of cookies and teach her how to read. Zinc decides to let Marina settle in with Nina for now, putting off her magic training. He asks Ian to take care of the younger boys and make sure they learn to guard the estate. Then, he reminds everyone about needing food and wine for the upcoming social event with Elder Tree. Zinc suddenly feels a strange and unsettling sensation, which makes him shudder. The people around him notice his reaction and call out to him, but he's confused and wonders what this weird feeling is.